Hello. Ontario Institute. We have a presentation on that too. Elizabeth here?
Yeah, thank you so much. So just wanted to set a bit of the stage. So after our conversation yesterday, Michelle and I had a probably reflective conversation and thought in terms about what may be helpful around what we may share. So I wanted to share a little bit about the what kind of occurred from an education reform perspective, the why. So we heard a lot yesterday around the rationale, and of course spending some time on the how we went about doing what we've done and where we are a bit today. So we'll share some practical, some of our lessons learned in the Canadian context, and I'll speak about Ontario as well. So yes, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, OIZ is how we pronounce it for short. And so just to provide some context, I know we chat a lot about PISA, and when we take a look at the Canadian education system, it's ranked for quite a bit of time now, has sustained a top ranking when we look at education systems around the world. And I'll speak to some of that because we had conversations yesterday around notions of literacy, competency, and I'll share with you how we've landed where we've landed in this time and place. Some other pieces that we also look at, we look in terms of talent. And how we rate from a talent index, and Canada rates quite highly in that context as well. So from an employer satisfaction perspective, we've achieved a level, quite a high ranking amongst organizations and employers for Canadian talent. And we're attributing that quite a bit to the investment and the time and the energy and the reform that's happened over the course of the past 20 years. A little bit about our system. So I think some of you heard yesterday, we do not have a federal Department of Education. Rather, we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, all in which, by our legislation, have the accountability around education. So that brings some unique elements to how we do what we do. Public education is provided for free when we look at the K-12 system. Isaac was just asking around post-secondary. No, that's not the case, although it is quite funded. Just to give some context around size, so across Canada, just over 15,000 schools. We have 5.3 million students. Another key element around Canada is that we're a bilingual country, so we have 2 official languages, English and French, which is also something that is of interest, because when we look at our rankings, when we look at things like PISA, the key interest in the story about Canada is one about diversity, and diversity in terms of language, in terms of various ability. So when we do an assessment of the children that come from Canada, we do not make any discrimination as to who participates. So as children of all abilities participate. So that's something of key interest from a research perspective as to how has that happened, and the diversity story that is Canada. And again, around size, just over 300,000 educators when we look across Canada. I want to spend some time around Ontario because Ontario is the most populous of the provinces, and you'll see in the background here that's a map of Canada, and the red is where Ontario pops out. It's because it makes up 40% of Canada's population. And so when we think about overall, out of the 5 million students across Canada, 2.1 of them are actually from Ontario. So when we look at some of the results that come from assessment, there's a bit of a lean that starts to happen just by the nature of how populous Ontario is. And of course, sharing a little bit of our story, I'm just going to share with you, again, there's not a federal oversight for education, but a provincial one. So I'll share with you a bit about the Ontario provincial story. So a little piece here around education reform, and we've chatted, as obviously what we're here to be talking about, we raised and chatted a bit about that. So I want to explain to you a little bit about where we were and how we've traveled in the past little while. And a lovely piece here from Michael Fullen, whose name was mentioned today as well as yesterday, who writes extensively on notions of change as well as sustainable change, and has been at the forefront of leading Ontario's education reform for sure, as well as across Canada and internationally as well. So the true story. So if we were to take a look back about 20 years ago, so between 1997 and the early 2000s, we had a bit of a situation. So our students were viewed as being of average performance. We had universities that were highly critical and expressed a high degree of dissatisfaction with the students that were graduating out of grade 12, who were completing high school. Our businesses were also indicating that the performance and the results that they were seeing as a result of the system, they were quite dissatisfied with as well. They weren't seeing the talent that they felt that they needed. So when we go back to that talent index, we were much lower ranked than we are today. Parents had a lack of confidence in the public education system. The politicians, the rhetoric of the day was most certainly to blame teachers for all the ills and what was wrong in the education system. And we also had then teachers who were suffering from very low self-esteem. So there was not peace in the valley of the Ontario education system about 20 years ago. Fast forward to today. We have students that are now deemed to be high performing, and I'll share with you just what we've seen over the course of 20 years in terms of what some of the priorities that we set and what we wanted to achieve, and we're seeing that we're achieving those. We have universities that are indicating a high degree of satisfaction with students who are graduating from Canadian high schools. Our businesses are also indicating, as we see by the talent index, a high degree of satisfaction. The notion of the talent that's emerging into the marketplace. Their greater concern right now is that there isn't enough. We need more of it. So hence we're a nation that relies on immigration and immigration policy. We have parents who have extreme confidence in the public education system. So 96, almost 97% of all children attend public education, as well as supportive politicians. And that's a bit of the story of what's happened over the course of the past 15 to 20 years, definitely the past 15. A lot of support from politicians in terms of setting education as a key priority and putting both the investment capital from a dollars perspective as well as a people perspective as well. And teachers. I think one of the greatest things that we've seen is this notion of self-esteem has most certainly increased over the past little while. And so teaching is a profession, it's deemed as a profession that children today would aspire and want to be a teacher. It's held in very high regard. Case in point, we actually have an overwhelming application of those who want to come most certainly into our institution, but across Canada who apply to be teachers. So it's definitely seen as a destination profession. And for many, it's deemed to be a calling. So that is a key piece. And part of this too, the question that we have all the time is how? How did this happen? And we highlight three things. One is the idea around research. So the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, to know its history, being established in the 60s when there was a cultural revolution that was happening in Canada at the time. But it was a key focus that the government felt it needed to ensure that there was evidence-based practices. That we weren't just going to come up with ad hoc approaches, but they needed to be evidence-based. And that's the role as a leading kind of research institution that OISE has most certainly played. The idea around consultation, again, from a government perspective, highly consultative, and that's the notion around also reaching out into the various communities and the various stakeholders. And although that may, some argue, lengthen a bit about the process, but the consultation and how we do what we do and the transparency that comes with that was also deemed to be highly critical. And then learning and professional development. Extensive, again, resources were applied to teacher education, both in-service and pre-service, principal education, Ministry of Education, the actual ministry itself, leadership capacity building, again, learning and professional development, all the way through the system were some of the key levers for change. Some actual tactics that kicked off in 2003 in the launch of reform, and there's just some highlights. There was the installation of a Chief Student Achievement Officer. So to understand the Ontario context is that everything that is done, the key focus is around student achievement. So the questions are always in around how is this going to advance our efforts for our students to achieve. And so the signal within the structure from a government perspective was to install that role. There's a dedicated literacy and numeracy secretariat, so that goes back to the notion of some foundational literacies. We can't do everything, but where are we actually going to keep our focus? So that was a key priority, literacy and numeracy. 5,000 new teaching positions were added, as well as a view to reduce class size, particularly in the younger grade levels, to bring in smaller class sizes. Additionally, there was the addition of 2,000 specialist teachers. So again, if our focus is on literacy and numeracy, what was the infrastructure that we're going to bring into the schools to enable teachers to perform? So recognition that the student-teacher relationship is the most critical one. So what is it that we need to do to enable it and to have it be as successful as it possibly could be? The voluntary turnaround program. And so this was the piece where schools that felt that they had been falling behind could voluntarily say, we want to participate and we want to adopt some of these structures so we can advance on our journey from a school effectiveness. Change, implementation perspective, really important because these are the early adopters. Those in the system that are recognizing that they are going to volunteer. And when you have that, and we talked a bit yesterday around notions of motivation, well, this was then tapping into those who are already motivated and wanting to participate. And that starts the whole change process. So a key lesson that we kind of carry forward with. And then various ancillary practices. Again, parents, communities, what were the methods that were going to be used for engagement? So very concrete ideas and tactics that were initiated back in 2008. And then some leading drivers. And what I wanted to raise, because this is a question that we'll have often, particularly from colleagues internationally and ministries, who will say, I only have so many resources, where do I start? Do I start focused on curriculum, or do I start on teacher education? And we'll offer to say teacher education being paramount, we can get to curriculum. But if we have the right attitudes, the right skills for our teachers, we'll go further from a change perspective. But what Fullen outlines for us here is that oftentimes in reform, we may be leading with the wrong drivers. And the leading, it's not to say that Ontario and in Canada, we don't have these drivers. We just may not be leading with them. And what I've just identified here is what have been some of the lessons learned in the Canadian context that helped advance from a change perspective. And one is focusing on a small number of goals. We can't do everything. So Ontario was very selective in terms of student achievement, literacy, numeracy. It was very clear in terms of what the goals were going to be, and it was also very clear in terms of what the measures were and the milestones they wanted to achieve. The idea around leadership at all levels, again, a very tactical idea in terms of implementation, but this speaks to the government support. So the Ontario Premier of the day, taking us back to 2003 and 2004, started a guided coalition, meaning brought the Student Achievement Officer himself along with his Minister of Education and met every 6 weeks and started to put the plans in place for change. And they led that consistently for over a decade. So it speaks to, again, some of the structures of what occurred. The high expectations and standards, and then how we're actually going to measure. So there was a whole structure created around that. Capacity building, again, an awful lot of resources because it was a focus on teacher and teacher enablement. And I can share some of the resources. They're publicly accessible and used extensively today, continue to be built. Mobilizing data and effective instructional strategies. So this is about evidence-based. So again, that if we're going to introduce notions of instructional strategies, they have to be evidence-based. We're not creating anything that was going to be ad hoc. And I think number 6 is the most critical one, the non-punitive manner. So when those schools kind of volunteered saying, oh, actually, I would like to participate, again, encouraging that. In recognizing where schools were stagnating, not to assume that there was an issue with the teacher, but perhaps there's a piece in there around how we might build better capacity. So very much a non-punitive approach And that's kind of falls in line with all that we would know about adult learning principles, notions of professional development. Some pieces have happened over time, and you can see where we were in 2002, 2003, and even data now that takes in 2015-16 has us inching up even further. And you can see there's been pockets where there's, ideas are a bit of stagnation. So always thinking about, how do we, what levers do we pull on to push a little bit forward? And so where we identified in our elementary schools are kind of levers, improving again classroom teaching and learning. Classroom teaching and learning, keep focusing on that. And the idea around the teacher enablement piece. The school effectiveness, the whole methodology and around there, the leadership capacity. One thing that we haven't talked a lot about here yet, but would be definitely something that we would want to raise in our country case, is that it's not just simply the role of the teacher, but when we think about principal and principal leadership, and how critical that is in terms of the structure in advancing reform and change. And then ideas around research. And then similarly, one of the focus was to improve graduation rates in Ontario, and you can see advancement in terms of that. Again, notions around leadership, the teaching and learning, the instruction pieces. A big piece here, because we're so concerned about the graduation rates, was focused interventions for those who are not graduating. And that became a key area in terms of how do we start to put, again, the right infrastructure and tactics in place to improve graduation rates. And then post-secondary, what we've seen, Canada has a very high participation rate in post-secondary education. And part of this is being attributed to just the efforts that happen in K-12 to encourage the populace to continue in its education pursuits. And again, I think culturally, Canada is a nation that values education, families value education, individuals value it. Things that we have learned along the journey, that all children can learn to be successful, and that goes down very much into our DNA, is very much part of our belief system. The school principal is the next most important factor to student achievement. If you minus the teacher, so critically important. The notion of coherence with all stakeholders around school improvement and student achievement. There's a very kind of clear structure and a systems alignment within Ontario, what happens around there. And now on to our competencies and how we've landed in this time and place. So we have a focus on is what we call our 6 C's. And I pulled this up because of the nature of what we were chatting about yesterday, and the idea around the foundational literacies, competencies, and then character qualities. And so from the World Economic Forum, I know you've seen this. Similar to the work that's been happening here, Ontario back in 2012, 2013, working with our Ministry of Ed, we also did a whole review and looking at various frameworks, about 26, from across Canada and internationally as well, to determine how we're going to advance this idea around our global competencies. So I kind of pulled this up only because of the conversations that we had yesterday. How do we define foundational literacies? And I think a lot of what was described yesterday is appearing here as well. You'll see here the competencies. Some of you referred to yesterday as the 4 C's, which is referenced there. And then there's this idea around the character and character qualities.
Oh, that's better.
And then the World Economic Forum further goes on to explain, this is from their report, The New Vision for Education. It was a focus more on technology. But they go on to explain, very similar to what Maria had shared with us in terms of the descriptor around competencies. So if the foundational literacies represent, kind of how you're applying skills to everyday tasks, the competencies, how you approach more complex challenges. And when we think about, again, what Julia was sharing with us yesterday, just the complexity of the world around us and how we're preparing talent to be able to effectively, hence this is why we've landed in this space of competencies. And then character, how students approach their changing environment. So this is all the pieces that are being outlined by the World Economic Forum. And so this is one of the frameworks that Canada and Ontario has focused on. And so when we think about 21st century competencies, we look at the knowledge, skills, and attributes, and we see them as additional to the foundational skills. Right, so I'm just going to go back to our foundational skills. So we see them as additional to, not different, not separate, just additional to. Other labels we've highlighted here that tend to be used interchangeably, and which I know from our ministry's perspective, cleaning up some of the language. But you'll hear terms like global competencies, global preparedness, some refer to it higher order learning and thinking skills. They all kind of connect in that way. And then a bit about why. And we've highlighted this as well. And Canada is saying exactly the same thing as all folks around the table here. Our economy requires competencies suited to an unpredictable model, both as an unpredictable economic model and what are going to be the implications socially. We just don't know, right? So the roles and the careers we may be preparing our children for today, the likelihood of them being available and ready for us in the next 5 years, we don't know. We can't be assured of that. So what do we do? There's emerging evidence as well on how we learn and how we optimize learning. So research is telling us more and more. And that technology can play a role to help us advance in that. It's not the be-all and end-all, but we're learning an awful lot more. We know more today about how we learn and how to optimize learning than we knew a decade ago. And then our expectations, which was also something that's being raised around the table. We have learners who have now expectations, and they're voicing their expectations. And that is very much true in our context. And what's interesting, from an Ontario perspective, we released in 2014 a renewed vision that we're going to make a commitment to the notion of 21st century competencies and a commitment to measuring. So this goes back, again, to our fundamental belief that we need to ensure that it's evidence-based, that what we're doing is in fact evidence-based. So by 2025, and this just came out when we launched our budget in 2014, our head of finance said, along with our premier, Ontario will be a world leader in higher order thinking skills, such as critical thinking and problem solving, which will allow Ontario to thrive in the increasingly competitive global marketplace. So that was a speech, and it's written right in our provincial budget. So very clear in terms of where we're headed. We spoke a bit about this, the cognitive interpersonal and intrapersonal, and then here in terms of how does this then start to align. So our key competencies, when we talk about our 6 C's, it's about making a measurable contribution to education attainment, relationships, employment, health, and well-being. That's the kind of rationale in terms of why the investment, why the focus. When we take a look at the 4 C's, right? So the critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, and innovation. Data tells us that there's measurable benefits to those areas of education, attainment, relationships, etc., etc. There was a question yesterday around entrepreneurship and where does that fit. We don't speak to that explicitly. However, where we see that is in the creativity and innovation space. So in that kind of 4th C. Where Ontario has gone is an addition of 2 other kind of global competencies. We have character education, which is the interpersonal domain, which is also viewed as being very important to one's well-being and success. So when we think about the research that's emerging around the idea of grit or resilience or perseverance, so again, in a very unpredictable economy, an unpredictable social environment, the idea around grit, resilience, growth mindset is even becoming more relevant and important. And what we know in the research, a lot of that from Angela Duckworth and her research had led the charge in that. And then citizenship education, which really speaks to global and being aware of the world around us. And in that, there was reference around digital and how that also connects in with us in terms of citizenship education. And so those are the 21st century competencies that Ontario and other provinces across Canada are integrating and adopting. So now the next question is, well, how do they appear and what does this start to look like? And this is the work that's ahead and what's going on right now. So this is actually some draft documentation that came out in late 2015. I'm just going to fast forward for a moment, because you'll see Global Competencies Draft Scoping Plan. And so this comes from the larger school boards in Ontario, who now thinking, okay, we have an agreement, we know this was required on the global competencies. How does this tie in with what we've identified as our priorities? Right? So this particular board had identified teaching and learning, absolutely, because that's one of the key pieces. Aboriginal education, which is actually accurately Indigenous education. Education for sustainable development, early childhood education development, wellness and mental health, experiential, and then assessment. And then you'll see the boxes above are essentially the representation of these 6 competencies. And what this board is doing is almost a reverse mapping. So it's taking a look at what's identified as priorities and connecting it back to what's being articulated in terms of the global competencies, so that over time it's going to be able to indicate how it is progressing in achieving on its priorities, as well as its efforts in global competencies. I just like this quote: as a teacher, I have to be a symphony conductor. Sometimes the brass is too brash and the percussion too loud. I sense the tempo and mood and alter it if necessary. And this also speaks to, from an Ontario and Canadian perspective, this notion around autonomy and our belief in our teachers. And we rely on them very heavily in terms of what they do and what they bring to life in the classroom. So a significant amount of autonomy in what occurs, and we rely on them and have belief in them as professionals. And belief is an important piece. And I think there's an element in there that we've also been examining, and it ties to how one even shows up or approaches teaching in the classroom. And because of our commitment and a recognition that all children, regardless of ability, can in fact achieve, do we actually believe that? And we instill that in our in-service and our pre-service teacher education. And this was just an interesting piece with our colleagues in Norway, just did a comparison just to understand where there's similarity and where there are differences. And we found it interesting that when we look at belief from an Alberta perspective, so in Canada, our belief is that students can learn best by finding solutions on their own. And that wasn't the case in how Norwegian teachers felt. And that also shows up in how we're teaching inside the classroom. And I'll speak to that in a little bit. But that gets to a kind of a core of some of our pedagogy and how we approach some of this.
And you have chosen Norway for comparison because it was the lowest figures?
No, Norway was doing the work.
Us.
Oh yeah, it chose us.
Yeah.
They were ecocentric.
I see.
So a little bit about curriculum. So the idea around critical thinking, creativity, or what we call inquiry-based approaches, that's just really very much interwoven across the curriculum. We have certain milestones that we look to achieve. The how, a lot of that in terms of how that's interpreted, is on the kind of heads and shoulders of the teacher in terms of to execute. So think of it as it's a roadmap. The teacher is well aware of what the outcomes are, what the milestones are going to be, how that teacher will get student A, from position X to position Z. That's for the teacher to figure that piece out. That also ties in because we have all children, all abilities. We don't make those distinctions. So we have approaches like differentiated instruction inside our classes. So the teachers also need to have that flexibility to know where that student is at and how they're going to carry them through to get them to the next milestone. So it's an interesting, when you see it in execution, it's an interesting piece to see. Just see what I'm highlighting here. And some of these pieces too, I'll speak to professional development. The how to do this effectively in the classroom is modeled in professional development practice. So in our in-service and pre-service, we model the methods so that not only would they then know the how and different instructional strategies upon which to pull, they've practiced it, they've seen it as a key component. So it's not something that resides, in one instance in pre-service. We carry it all the way through our professional development activities.
Can you really prove the fourth point there? If you go back, I will ask that later. Do you really believe that you can make these PISA results and credible evidence? I don't believe it, but you seem to believe.
So why don't we just park that and we can come back?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I just doubt. It would be a good thing, but I doubt.
Inquiry-based learning, so this is essentially our approach. So when we'll introduce, for example, introduce a lesson, we would not see an Ontario teacher start off to say, this is what we're going to cover today, here is our lesson, let me model something for you, now you get up, you do, okay, correct, sit down, let's move on to the next. You will not see that. What you would see is what we call our three-part lesson. So the teacher will start with some notion of an activity that engages the inquiry process. And that the students are there to discover, to work with one another, to ask the various questions. Then there's some formality in terms of an instructional strategy or intervention is introduced to help carry the concept further and for the students to make the connections. And then the teacher ties it up in the end and makes sure that the gel is there, that the connections are quite explicit and that the student is actually understood. And that's what we refer to as our three-part lesson. And that's something that we teach and we expect to see in practice. And so it brings in these kinds of concepts around asking, investigating, creating, discussing, reflecting. And when you think back to the ideas of the 4 C's or the 6 C's, these behaviors, these methods are quite critical to see that activated. Well, we also teach our teachers, we talk about things like thin versus thick questions, and just what some of the nuance may be. And so here's an example where if I were to say, pick a character, from the play Macbeth, how would this minor character describe Macbeth and why? There's a little bit more than of a nuance here as to describe the character of Macbeth, giving examples to justify your description. So the kind of expectation, again, to reinforce ideas. And so, again, the inquiry process and how that starts to show up. And this can be, again, quite nuanced, but the impact and what that means over time, this is what we spend time in teaching our teachers around how to do these kind of strategies effectively. So thin versus thick is something we chat about quite often. The other piece is questioning to engage students.
Just out of curiosity, which parts they played in that Macbeth question? What was the selection of those students given that task? Did they play the play of a servant or?
This was just an example.
So you don't know how it behaves. Interesting. Okay.
But it's just to give an example.
Yes,
it can be in any lesson.
Yes, I got interested in the question.
Yeah, it can be any lesson, but just a bit of the how. Again, one of the things that we're very explicit around talking about learning and asking our students, what are you learning and why? Is what you are learning, is it easy or difficult? What makes it easy or difficult? Do you know how to improve your work? What makes learning interesting? And this isn't just the accountability of our teacher, this is what we do with our principals as well. This is an expectation of, principal is not someone who sits in an office, absolutely not. The principal, there's an expectation that inside their school, They may have 600 or 1,000 students. They're expected to know the name of each one of those students. And they're expected to be in the classrooms, and they should know and see signs of learning and know how to engage their teacher effectively around that. And it's not about being a subject matter expert in science or a subject matter expert in English or history. That's not necessary, because you can still be engaging students and asking them these questions. And students can ask one another. So this leads us to another element that we focus on is around instructional leadership and the expectation that teachers are instructional leaders, principals are instructional leaders. And again, I emphasize, because we just do so much around principal leadership and principal education in terms of seeing the impact. And there are some of the things that have been kind of highlighted along the way. And again, principal leadership, second only to classroom teaching and its impact on student achievement. And when we think about, the results that we've seen over time, and then how are we going to, what's the next intervention? What does the research tell us if we're going to skip and bring that bar up that next percent? And so a lot of focus for us right now on the principal leadership piece, and there has been for quite some time, but we have seen that has had an impact for us on notions around student achievement and how that's being assessed and measured. From a professional development standpoint, this just gives some examples of where, some of the pieces that we focus on from a foundations, and there's kind of key elements in here. There's some specialist, so inside some teacher education practices when we get to in-service, so the ongoing support. In Ontario, although you may have completed your degree, that does not make you licensed to teach. You have to go and complete an additional, we call additional qualification, just to prime you and get you even further ready and licensed. We also have a body, an association, a group in Ontario called the Ontario College of Teachers, and this is very much set up because it's the belief that teachers can best engage teachers. And it's about the profession teaching the profession. And so there's the whole structure in terms of support in around that. And then you'll see as we move up, when we look at the leadership space, again, one of the areas, and we do a lot of practice around, is what we call our teaching and learning walks. Similar to familiarity around the medical rounds kind of process, the expectation that principals as well, if you want to become a principal, you can't just apply. You have had to have gone through a certification process to become a principal. And then upon completion and you become a principal, well, one of the things we talk to you about and teach you is teaching and learning walks. How to go effectively around your school and in your classes and see learning in action, and how to coach your teacher and enable the teacher in that space.
We're at 38.
And then equity and inclusion. Finally, just wanted to highlight, because this goes again to the DNA of Ontario for sure, and across Canada. Just the picture, I think, says it all. It's not that every child gets the same box, because not every child needs the same box. One child can see over the fence just fine, thank you very much. Another child may need 2 boxes. And that's, again, we believe that every and all students can achieve, and how do we support the individual. And then, of course, the focus, because it was mentioned yesterday, on special education.
Yeah.
I want to emphasize that too. And that's that.
Thank you. It was very enlightened, very comprehensive.
Oh, yeah.
Do we have questions? Yes, please.
It was very optimistic, and my heart is really growing. 2 simple questions, just to check that I understood you correctly. I calculated that your school on average has 350 students. Is it true? How big is the biggest school in
Oh, they vary.
They vary.
Tremendously.
Tremendously.
Yes.
Yeah, they can vary from 300 up to 2,000.
2,000.
You wouldn't normally get 2,000 in an elementary school.
High school, secondary school.
Yeah, but okay.
Canada is a very big country. You cannot big schools in small villages.
Well,
So simple.
So it's not simple.
It's a huge country. You cannot have big buildings everywhere. Therefore, the primary schools must be, by definition, small.
Well, this is my point.
Well, they vary, is the answer.
Yeah.
The answer
They
is...
vary,
yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
and we have no standard deviation. But still, 350, it's a lot. In Poland, it is 170, I guess.
So small.
All the schools in my neighborhood are around 600 primary, K to 6.
Okay, so that this causes no problems for children. No cruelty, no aggression, no. Okay, and another question. You mentioned about streaming in the classroom, that children are divided.
Differentiated instruction. Which
Yeah,
isn't
but
streaming.
what do you mean differentiate?
So in differentiated instruction, the teacher will use different strategies for teaching the heterogeneous children in the classroom. And so the idea is that you don't have one approach that you use with everybody, but that you use different instructional approaches.
Individual approach?
Could be.
Could be.
And it could be that you're doing, like, it could be that if you're teaching if you're working on a particular a book study, for example, that you will have children grouped and they may be reading different books, for example. It could be grouped, can be individual. It's challenging for teachers. So our model of special education is an integrated model. And so most children, whether they're identified as having special education needs, whether they're on the autism spectrum, whether they have behavioral issues, whether they have physical disabilities, are integrated into the classroom.
Differentiation pertains only to special needs.
No,
not to
every
every children. So are the groups permanent?
No.
It is.
No is the answer.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
So it's going to
They are
vary
not permanent.
across. It's going to vary across classes. It's going to vary across areas of curriculum, because you may have some children, for example, who are really struggling in math, and so you're differentiating in one particular way for the math lesson. But those children are not the same children that require differentiation in their social studies.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding to compare. If you compare with Korean presentation, they have much stronger focus on extra lessons activity. So, am I right that we see two different models of development of these key competences? One, Korean is more on extracurricular activity, and you rely more on classroom or lesson-related, at least, activities.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, further questions?
Let me repeat my serious question, whether you could prove that the structure of teacher activities and changes in that are reasons for PISA results. Because, I have always liked Canada to be the winner of PISA. The only big country, multicultural, so Canada is the real winner, not Finland or New Zealand or whatever. And therefore, we claimed in Finland that good results are due to teacher education. But there is no proof. You cannot really prove it. And the downward must then be also due to teacher education, of course. So it's very complicated, because even if you are using pluralist teachers, you have 300,000.
To the question.
There are very old ones and young ones. How could you even claim to prove that innovations and reforms of teacher education today or yesterday will have an effect today, when most of the teachers have been trained day before yesterday? You have a complex collective. The collective of teachers is made of different type of persons, different ages. You produce new teachers. They constitute 5%, 10% in the beginning. Later on, they are.
That's true, and I think you're right at sort of a broad level about the fact that we see things co-occurring and we don't know whether one causes the other. But in terms of the teachers, I think, well, you can speak to this, Elizabeth, that if we just focus on the initial teacher education, on the pre-service training, it's true that the teachers that were trained 20 years ago weren't trained this way. But the continuous, ongoing professional learning, I think, is what's going to probably kind of even the field in terms of, right? So to assume that the teachers that were trained 20 years ago are teaching only the way they were trained 20 years ago, I think is that's what is not the case.
No, I agree even that.
Yeah. So, but I take your point about the.
Do you have states in the Canada where results are different? You can have internal comparisons between Ontario and Alberta and Quebec. And I have checked sometimes.
Yeah, that would be my also. Thanks for pointing that. It would be great if you may concentrate on Ontario. That's a great case. But it would be great to have a small section on what happens in other.
And we're not going to be able to put a small section on the other 12, right?
Yeah,
provinces and territories. That's not going to.
Not in details, definitely, but just.
And not exhaustive, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking, I'm reading, she knows. Well, but not every single one,
And
probably.
tests are different, and they are comparable or not?
Absolutely, totally different. We do not we don't have any standardized examination.
Like
that's a final examination.
By the way, Okay.
Okay.
England.
I am not advertising England. I am not advertising what we have done. When Isaac approached the team in UCL and said, if we want to join this project, actually we wrote back and said, you may be best not asking us. Because England does not pay any attention to PISA. It has no interest in PISA. Not really. It occasionally uses it now to beat teachers around the head, but it's not really interested in PISA. It doesn't pay attention to the OECD. It has no interest in the World Economic Forum, and it speaks a different language. So for me, the question is, listening to the OISE team, how come there is such a strong convergence on a coherent narrative about education, its values and its purposes in Canada? All right, so that means that therefore we are thinking not so much who's got the best answer to the question about key competencies, but how come these answers, this discourse has arisen in this place. The most interesting thing for me watching the OISE presentation was when Elizabeth got to the slide with leading drivers. What are the things that are motors for change? Every single one of those motors was on the list and underpinned and fed into the literacy and numeracy strategies that New Labour introduced back in 1997, bar one. Okay?
Yeah.
The exception was the punitive use of accountability measures. All right? So England had all of those things on the leading drivers, bar the fact that it has had very punitive accountability measures. And the trajectory of the reform was completely different. There is one other salient factor. When the literacy and numeracy strategies were introduced in England, they were introduced ahead of the introduction in Ontario. And to broker the deal, whereby government would give a lot of resource to education, government insisted on knowing by how much performance would improve. All right, so they wanted schools to say, and in the lift, going from the ground floor to the floor where the minister was going to have the meeting with the policymakers, they decided that the target would be 80%. They decided it would be 80% because that means a fifth won't make it. Whereas if you make it 75%, that's a quarter of the population won't make it. Ontario learnt from us, and they set their target lower. So having set their target lower, they could then claim they were a success. And one of the other factors here, therefore, is the buy-in in the relationship between politicians, policymakers and schools. So what I have to tell you from England is probably a disaster. I'm going to try and explain how the disaster happened, and I'm starting with this. This is not a PISA diagram, and it doesn't explain to you where the schools are, but what it does do is it gives you year on year where are kids, and over on the far right hand we have the key assessment instruments that are in use within the English system. We are about to, in reception, that's when children are aged 3 to 4, we are about to introduce a baseline measure which will assess children on entry to school in anticipation that we will be able to identify exactly how much value schools have added at point of exit. Okay, so assessment here is not really about the competence of the child. In America, assessment is about the individual. It's about what the individual possesses. It doesn't much matter prior to the introduction of a common curriculum what the curriculum content was, because you either have this amount of intelligence or you have some more. All right. Whereas in the English system, what we are assessing is how well has the school performed by how well the kids perform. Now, most of us can immediately think of a problem here, because most middle-class children perform better than most working-class children. Okay, this has bedeviled the English system. Christoph said yesterday, the average is a fantasy. It does not exist. Range and variance matter. In the English system, if you are at the average, you are deficient. You are deviating from the norm. If an outlier exists, an outlier proves that everybody could be it. So why aren't you? Okay, so this is the logic running around the statistical data. In a system where we have a lot of social segregation in our schools, and that means that therefore there is an enormous variance in performance. Okay, you see the enormous variance in performance and you then punitively hit the school. Never mind about putting up your hand and asking for help. Actually, in the English system, if you don't see year-on-year improvement in school results, on a sample that is not a representative sample, it's a random draw from the population of the schools, may be segregated, so your random pick from a working class catchment area will give you different results from a random pick from a middle class area. But whichever way it is, that plugs into what your results will be, but not how government treats it. So if your results one year are lower than the next year, the expectation is there's something wrong with the school. You did it last year, why haven't you done it this year? Okay, we have, running alongside this and not on here, I don't want to get too into the logic of why England has gone the way it's gone. But the assessment, our failure to meet that initial target of meeting 80% had very perverse effects. It meant that politicians who wanted a success then stepped away from something they thought wasn't successful. As a result, what they've done is opened up the school system to private suppliers. Okay? A key motivation for opening up the system to private suppliers is that private suppliers own the problem, not the government. If the school is wrong, it must be the private supplier. I'll recontract. So there is a lot of instability in the school system now by recontracting at school level if it doesn't meet the targets. Okay. Okay. So all of this is also then playing into.
Just for understanding. Frankly speaking, I was at some point charmed by your value-added assessment.
Yes.
But you just said that because it really punishes under
they have
progressive.
tried.
Yeah.
The value added has not done the job. It has not done the job, and actually Harvey Goldstein now accepts it.
I see.
He has just written a very important paper.
There is, I mean, we know it, there is random variation between 8 cohorts, so you cannot really control that
Yeah.
variation, and that leads.
It's-
If you have
Yeah,
very
you just
strict,
can't do it.
if you have
It's-
very
it's the
strict
ill-
criteria,
It's the,
Okay.
that's the reason.
the statistical illiteracy
That's what I was
of
thinking.
the inspectorate
That's what I was
and
thinking.
government and the public
Yeah.
is too big, and you cannot counteract it. So nobody has.
Okay, I got it.
It's
I got it.
It's a huge problem. Okay. So what is driving change in our system is really the school level reporting of performance data in the public domain. So every year on each of those tests that I showed you, the school has to say what their kids have got. It was introduced as a driver for parental choice in a social class segregated system, so that those most interested will then choose the best schools. All right. Anyway, but we've also got running along behind us, and another reason I think why we have not bought into the competencies discourse is we have a very strong historical divide in the United Kingdom around the distinction between academic versus vocational. So we don't have gymnasiums. We've never really planned for vocational qualifications. We run with an examination system at age 16, which is predicated, when it was devised, the pass rate was for 30% of children. 30% of children were meant to pass. We've kept that standard. Okay, and then we complain because not more than 30% of children don't pass it. I mean, it's just, how can you explain this? Okay, in terms of what is going on in discourse, talk about education in England at the moment, the Tory government, our Conservative government, they are absolutely not interested in competencies. They dispute whether they have any value at all, and instead they are very much taken with E.D. Hirsch's notion of knowledge. So they are very happy to go and lecture the Chinese that they are abandoning rote learning and they are forgetting that knowledge matters. And really that is what our education system will do. There are then knock-on effects from that about the only way in which we recognise the future and that we have to plan for the future is we have now schools have been mandated to teach coding to primary school children from the age 5.
You mean programming?
Yeah.
Okay, that'll fix the future. We are characterised by OECD as a high autonomy, high accountability system. High accountability we all understand. High autonomy is not well specified in PISA. Actually, it normally means having the capacity to hire or fire a teacher. That is not what's happened in England. Basically, we have taken out the role of municipalities in planning education. Municipalities are no longer entitled to open any new schools, despite the fact that we have rising school numbers. Schools can open if parents say they want one here. This is outside of a planning framework because parents don't know the information about planning for the long distance, but we borrowed that off Sweden and we think it'll be good because it means we will have different kinds of planned schools. So one of the first to open up taught Latin in the primary years. On grounds this would be good for children because that's what these parents wanted. Yes, do that. We then have a lot of religious schools opening up. So we do have Muslim schools, Jewish schools, Montessori schools with public funding. It is very chaotic. We also have academies who are like charter schools, okay? The story is that we've recently, the Tory government has slimmed down our curriculum. So instead of trying to specify everything that should be taught and doing it on a consensus amongst academics, using research evidence, they have cherry-picked particular individuals who think will give them the answer to the curriculum that they want, a very knowledge-focused curriculum. There is often one individual standing behind a key part of the curriculum now, so we now have grammar tests for 11-year-olds that ask them to identify fronted adverbials. Yeah. This is because a linguist thinks fronted adverbials are an important part of English language. He has no understanding of children. He has no understanding of child development, but he has specified questions that are deemed to be empirically right or empirically wrong. And if you give children in a test a question that can be deemed empirically right or empirically wrong, then you can mark it by computer. And we don't have to have professional judgment. Yes, it really is as bad as this. Okay, so there are freedoms But the freedoms are also hugely constrained by the assessment. Okay? You can't say, I don't want my students to learn about fronted adverbials, never mind who the students are in the class, because that is the test. And if you don't pass the test, there will be punitive intervention. And what is happening around punitive intervention is a lot of head teachers are losing their jobs. Nobody wants to become a head teacher, because if you have bad results, then that is the end of your career. So we have huge problems in head teacher supply, which are being solved by appointing executive heads who will oversee clusters of schools and ensure that a cluster of school is doing what it is the head says.
Receipts means, what do you mean receipts?
Oh, resits for students if you fail. We have recently managed, this is another nod to the future, we have decided that all children will stay in education up until 18. If they fail the exams, the key exams at age 16, the curriculum for 17 is resitting the exams.
And repeat the grade?
You repeat, yeah.
Repeat,
In effect, you repeat the grade.
I see.
Okay, if you fail the phonics check in year 1, you resit it. And then they were suggesting you would resit it for a third time if you'd failed it for the third time.
Until
Actually,
18.
No, this is for 6-year-olds.
For six,
But
for
the
16.
government is of the philosophy that if you resit the exam, it will make the teacher work harder and therefore the child will pass. All right, so that's the theory of change that is running this, okay? I put here a quote from current Minister of Schools.
I know it from Poland. Knowledge first.
So we have removed over 3,000 low-value qualifications from performance tables and introduced rigorous new standards. The examinations that children are taking are becoming more academically ambitious. In other words, you say you want more smarter kids, you make the tests harder, then they must pass. You couldn't make this up if you tried. One of the other things that is on this slide, I've already talked a bit about tests with empirically right or wrong answers. We are no longer assessing young children on their capacity to write because we can't get reliable assessment from teachers as to what their writing skill is. So we will ask them instead about grammar, punctuation and spelling, and we will set them some reading tests. So you are now narrowing the curriculum to the things it's easiest to test. Never mind about how reliable or valid.
And we can ask Microsoft to do the work anyway.
What you're also doing, if you look, I can get this to, maybe I can't there. We are reporting to parents against national norms. So at age 7 you will be told whether your child is performing at the national average, below the national average, or is above. And that's it. You get no other information.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah. All of this is making me think about, as a sociologist, I have read a lot of Basil Bernstein, and Basil Bernstein talks about the curriculum as combining the instructional, that's the content of the curriculum, with the regulative. That's how you understand the social order. The social order here is very high. It is very clearly marking out that we are creating a hierarchical society in which there are winners and losers, and they want everybody to know who the losers are. Okay, but this has been accompanied, I'm afraid to say, by changes to teacher training, which, given that the priority is knowledge, then the knowledge of the teacher is the knowledge that they have of their subject. Okay, they don't really need to know anything about child development or about pedagogy. They do need classroom control. And most of the teacher training they are now trying to make it school-based. There was a suggestion last year that they would actually stop university-based routes altogether. This is despite the fact that students would rather be trained in a university than tied into the way this school does things. There's been no effort to train the people who are running school-based teacher training, and actually we now have a huge problem in teacher supply. Okay. To try and bring us back to the actual subject of this seminar, which is to do with competencies and new literacies. We have this high autonomy, high accountability regime. There is very little room for stakeholder discussion now in our system. So really it is up to the Minister of State to decide. So the Minister of State can change the exams, and the Minister of State does change the exams, and they don't need to consult, and they don't need to ask stakeholders. If you actually do this, it means that where competencies and new literacies end up is in a place that this government doesn't care about, which is in vocational education. And that takes us straight back to our historic divide, our priority to create an elite via an academic route, and our absolute disregard for what other people are doing. So we do get frequent attempts. This is, the Wolf Report. They were trying to work out a way of thinking through what a vocational curriculum should be post-16, so that you're not simply asking students to resit exams they failed, you're trying to do something else. People sit in a room, they try and come up with ideas, but it very rarely turns into much. And the best that we can do is trying to imagine jobs. So this is actually, it's a proposal currently before government. But if you look, for instance, under hair and beauty, the jobs we're thinking about are a hairdresser, a beauty therapist, or a barber. All right, so it's very job specific, and it's not dealing with competences.
Are they separate school for barbers?
No, you could have separate qualifications for
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Okay?
So what is
Типа кластера.
Vocations.
They are vocations.
Or
They're
jobs.
they are
They
actual
might be called
vocations.
jobs.
So it's back to what Jaakko was talking about in terms of guilds.
Yeah.
almost. It's a guild description of education. It's not trying to tease out competencies that float above the actual job.
Right.
It is trying to equip children to go to jobs. Now that is a very difficult calculation when you have a job market that is changing very quickly.
And someone is qualified as a barber, he or she cannot be a beauty designer, so
No.
Another school, another diploma, right?
They would have to take a different diploma. Yeah.
Oh, for real. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely. So, we were asked by Maria to talk about best practices, and I can't remember, worst anyway. The best practice, there is still conversation that is trying to go on that looks more like competencies and literacies. This was suggested by my colleague Anne Hodgson, but it's happening at some distance from government. Government gives it some funding, but it doesn't really own it, because then it won't have to accept any problems. It doesn't have to plug it into the system. It can evade all its responsibilities. But people are trying, because this really matters to employers. All right, so employers recognise that something is wrong, but unfortunately in the British system they also don't want to pay to put it right, okay, I'm afraid. And a major failure, we have now reached a point in assessment where there is a very big campaign going on in our country at the moment to try and stop the assessment system as it currently is, which involves the British Education Research Association, of which I am president. We have joined it. Teacher unions have joined it, parents have joined it. There is a lot of very urgent campaigning around this. The House of Commons...
Parents are against examinations?
Yes.
The public examinations.
Committee has just reported trying to change the system because it is so not working. Okay. So... I think what I bring to this in terms of us, there's nothing to be borrowed here, okay? A warning. But I think what it makes me think about is why it's possible that England could have walked itself down this particular route. And partly, I think, for me, it's the disengagement from education that has historically plagued our country, because for a lot of children, education has never operated as an escalator to anywhere. And that's inbuilt into generations and communities. So the lowest achievement in our country is in areas where the economy is most bust and where there is no possibility intergenerationally for work. and there is very little hope. Whereas London actually bucks the trend. It has some of the highest areas of social deprivation. It has a hugely ethnically diverse population. It does very well because parents and communities are still engaged with education. Once you've lost engagement with education, I think there are real problems. And I'm not convinced that the competency curriculum in itself could solve that, but trying to build a consensus across policymakers, teachers, parents, children, that strikes me as absolutely key and important. And without that, I don't know really how you can manage to make something work. There we go.
Thank you very much. Gemma, I guess it's very enlightening. But you have also, across the border, or imaginable border in Scotland, you have a different approach.
Yes.
Am I right that in Wales as well, they recently...
This is only England. I'm only describing England to you. There are 4 different regions in the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland. Wales abolished the reporting of performance data at school level. Its results have gone down in PISA. It is used by the English government as a justification for keeping school level reporting of performance data. So the cases in the other regions are mainly used by England to insist that we are doing the right thing. Scotland probably put more effort into trying to devise a competency-based curriculum. Well, certainly in the UK, probably in Europe actually, and has tried very hard. They are having problems at the moment because they think the results in both maths and English have gone down. But I think Jarko's question about how long do you need to judge the value of a reform is a good one there. But part of the problem in the UK now is because we have these 4 different approaches, they can each argue politically for why they're right or wrong. So if you see a weakness north of the border in Scotland, then it comes under intense pressure to change. So the political dimension to education reform is never far away. We cannot find in the UK a safe space where we can just look at the research evidence. It's not possible.
I see.
This is probably typical for every country, but nobody speaks so openly about this.
But also on literacy, I guess again that your example with the introduction of coding in the primary school, it really demonstrates the government's understanding of new literacy. And in fact, the changes in primary school curriculum could give us some light on what the countries consider as a literacy. But there was also something like 10 years ago, you didn't mention that, a big literacy program itself run by our former visiting professor Michael Barber.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
That is the literacy and numeracy strategy that we introduced ahead of the Ontario National Literacy Strategy. It was Michael Barber who decided that the target should be 80% in the lift going up to speak to the minister. And really the problem was that they could never hit 80%. So the longer it went on under New Labour, the more of the Tory party then in opposition attacked them for it. You've spent all this money and see you haven't reached your target. And they got about 10 years through which they managed to survive that, and then they got They ended up giving it anyway. It's a story of politics. Politicians sabotaged Michael Barber's strategy and brought it down because the New Labour politicians couldn't defend it as a success when it hadn't hit the target. If Michael Barber had gone for 75%, it had been a success.
The target's right is
It would have been a success.
important.
Just on history, I didn't realize the so deep historical link between England and Canada. That was same persons, Fullan, Hargreaves, all participating, and you did it nicely, and they spoiled it. Interesting.
No, Fulham's team actually came and evaluated. I mean, there were problems in the National Literacy Strategy. It went very fast. It probably is the biggest programme of in-service retraining of teachers. It introduced a new way of doing pedagogy. It hit all of the things that were on the leading drivers on Elizabeth's slides. But it did so in a context. But I think the other thing, though, to say about this is that in England, none of this is stopping our deindustrialisation. None of this is stopping a growing feeling of economic uncertainty about the future, in which then not hitting 80% matters to the public. So education becomes the whipping boy for all of the things that aren't going on in the economy. And it then becomes more and more difficult to find a space in which to have an intelligent conversation about what should change.
A simple question about that 8%. Well, 80% means something. If you have a ready-made instrument for measurement, but if you make a curriculum that they declare 80%, then some guys should devise tests. And this is up to them whether 80% will be achieved or not. So, really, I don't understand the whole mess. I mean, if politicians control your education, that 80% should be made doubly.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it's complex reasons.
That's a
why
complex
that's not
story.
the case.
Yeah,
I mean, I could tell you. I'll tell you after.
Further questions related to, I guess, again, in fact, as I wrote to you when we discussed the value of English case, we consulted with our colleagues, and we decided that it would be good to have different cases, and what's important, you can tell this story partially at least, and also compare with Scotland and Wales. So I'm ready to move with the Russian case. I will present the Russian case for funny reason, because I wanted to tell you more about Soviet attempts than the Russians. Because in Russia, what we have, it's in Russia, the story is a bit boring, similar to England in a way. But Soviet story is really exciting, and I guess we can draw some lessons from the Soviet story. So, but a few words about Russian education system. We have 11 years school education, and constitutionally only 9 years are mandatory, but according to the new law on education, all 11 years are mandatory, but there is there is a turning point when students after the grade 9 can choose vocational track. And in theory, all students in vocational schools receive both general education and vocational education in 3 years or even 4 years. But in reality, nobody controls really the quality of general education there. So, and the interesting thing that after the introduction of national exam, which made schools really accountable for the final results, and the national exam takes place after the grade 11, schools got incentives to throw out low performance students after the grade 9 to vocational schools. So if in 2007, only 25% of graduates of secondary school went to vocational schools. Last year, 48%, almost half, turned to vocational schools. So we see it as a very disturbing sign. And on preschool, it's very interesting. Preschool in Russia is quite good. And Russia was one of the countries with the highest preschool coverage in 60s, for example. And now almost 90% of kids of this age, between 3 and 7, comes to kindergarten. But unlike England, for example, or many other countries, it's not officially mandatory. So if you don't send your child to preschool in age 6, it's okay. And it creates some inequality. Also, just one word that Russia is a country with very strange, not very strange, but similar to many other post-socialist countries. Russia has quite high results in teams and quite low results in PISA. And the gap is the highest among any country. So Russia, during all teams results, all teams rounds,
and pearls. You were on the first place in pearls.
Russia is in top 3.
Yes.
In teams in top 6, and in PISA in between 20 and 30.
Yes.
So, in fact, our institute conducted the first in the world, in the history, study when we ran PISA on the same sample as the teams. And frankly speaking, I expected something really shocking and interesting, but the curves were similar, just PISA curve were below teams curve. So the same students that did good in teams, they did relatively good in PISA. But it confirmed our previous finding that Russian textbooks just very formal, and they do not contain, Russian curriculum doesn't contain real life tasks, etc., etc. Even in teams, by the way, there are tasks that require complex, in mathematics, complex calculations and reasoning. And Russian students did exceptionally well in complex calculations and relatively low in reasoning tasks. So it really shows that we have very rigorous curriculum, let's say, in math, but it's not about applying knowledge in real situations. Why and how it happened? And just a few words about the scope of the system. Currently we have 41,000 schools in Russia, and you see that compared with 1970, the number dropped almost twofold. And the number of kids also dropped, but not such dramatically. And the number of schools dropped in rural areas. So in the last 40 or 50 years, Russia experienced dramatic changes from really all, and in 1970 about half of the population lived in rural areas, and now less than 15. So we think that these dramatic changes should be kind of absorbed by the education system, but they didn't. So a few words about Soviet legacy. And I start with a famous quotation by Lenin, the founder of the Soviet system and real socialism. And in fact, I took this quotation from famous, not famous really, but from John Dewey's book, Impressions from Revolutionary World, which he published in the States in 1929, and I really like this book. And so the main point by Lenin is that it's the name. The goal of the school is to construct communist society, and all three words are important. To construct, not to give something to raise naturally. To construct. Communist, it's clear, that's a special type of the society, and society, not individual. In fact, in order to construct society, you have to construct individual, but with the goal to construct society. It made Soviet system, which then spread quite widely to different countries, including China and Northern Korea, and still in Northern. When I read something about schools in Northern Korea, I recognize really communist ideal. So moving from society to individual, one of the another founder of the Soviet system said very clearly that education is a purposeful and systematic influence on a child to instill in him the desirable qualities. This is, by the way, why I'm so scared still when I hear about values education.
And character education.
And
character
same thing.
education.
Yeah.
Because we have some desirable qualities, character qualities, and what are we going to do? Instill, and that might be where it leads us. So, when Dewey interviewed Russian educators in late 20s of the 20th century, he quoted one of them that the Soviet approach was a social behaviorism approach. But it's very important why Dewey really liked Soviet education, early Soviet education, because it was the idea. In fact, I found this word and I had some difficulties in finding the right Russian translation. But now I understand what it means. It means kind of adjusting two different things, right?
And you know
It's
where
a
it comes
joint.
from, right?
Yeah, it's from
Cabinet making, right? Carpentry.
yeah, it's from carpentry.
Yeah.
But how you put together school and out of school social activity? That was the main. So one of the goals of the early Soviet educators was to link this activity and really to educate students within this connection, and
Take total control.
And what is important, and what is important, as you see in the
Something very clever.
from the quotation below, the important was that the school is to counteract and transform tendencies and influences from family and neighborhood, etc., etc. In fact, when Fidel Castro built his best schools in Cuba, he quoted Dewey because he wanted, and he created boarding schools for future leaders of Cuba to avoid bad influences and individualistic influence of families. Why? But again, what was the purpose of this putting together school and out of school activities? Let's look on. Okay, yeah. Let's look on the curriculum that emerged in late 30s. It's not, by the way, I will say a few words later about experiments that Dewey particularly liked. But finally, the main design of the Soviet system. So I would say that early design of the Soviet system was similar to Canadian. Sorry, it's not negative comparison, but the idea that lessons could help students to know the outside world, to be prepared to outside world, etc., etc. But and you liked it very much, and there was a special method which you admitted was bigger and more and richer than his project method, called complex method. So there was no small project, but students, let's say, quarter of the academic year, they studied farms.
Yeah.
In all and they studied all subjects through studying farming. And so you liked it very much. But in early 30s, the communist authorities realized that students becoming quite active, and that's a lesson that British English conservatives also could learn, but they often don't know the basics. So almost all experimental schools that you admired were closed. Stalin brutally repressed these experimentators, and in mid-30s, the structure of school activities, these complexes disappeared, and the structure of school activities was constructed from three elements. First, traditional subjects, like mathematics, physics, chemistry, and less arts. Russia still, as a legacy of the Soviet times, art teaching ends in grade 7. So after grade 7, no arts classes, no music, no drawing, no drama. Drama never existed in national schools. But more science, no science as integrative subject. From grade 6, physics, biology, from grade 7, chemistry. And they are taught in very traditional way, knowledge-oriented. The group of subjects, very interesting, ideological subjects. In fact, all humanities and social studies could be considered as ideological subjects. Even we had to memorize Pushkin or read Tolstoy. We did it within very narrow ideological framework, and the main objective was not to develop artistic or aesthetic feelings, but to learn that Tsar's regime was oppressed and revolutionaries were better than their
saved the
enemies.
nation.
But what is often missed by Western frankly speaking, and by Russian historians of the Soviet education, that mandatory participation in extra lesson social activities and students' political organization was part of the curriculum, like in Korea. So you cannot avoid that. You had to participate. It was mandatory social activity, set of social activities. And but interesting thing that the designers of this system were quite clever people, and they understood the role of emotions, aesthetic, etc. Therefore, the taxonomy of educational goals included not just knowledge and skills, but experience of creative activities, experience of emotional and value-based feelings, and patriotic and communist views and values. So, one of the, if we are talking about our framework, I tried to look to the Soviet education through managing others, working with others, managing self and thinking. In terms of working with others, Soviet experience is really instructive, because as Dewey mentioned, the important thing was to create habits so that persons will act cooperatively and collectively. And again, in early Soviet experiments, there were a lot, in these complexes, in these projects, obviously there were a lot of collective work. But when Soviets moved to traditional subjects, they are extremely, that type of teaching is extremely individualistic. There were no project work, group work in Soviet classrooms. But it was not replaced. The existence of variety of social activity, collective social activities, kind of worked for the goal that Dewey highlighted, to act cooperatively and collectively. How, and again, as I mentioned earlier, in early stages, this objective was achieved through curriculum complexes, and after that, through children political organizations. And interesting, it's interesting how Dewey was, in a sense, blind because he considered that as a school of democracy. He wrote that Russian school children much more democratically organized than our own, and to note they are receiving through the system of school administration and training, etc., much more systematically than in our democratic countries. What Dewey didn't notice probably, that indeed Russian Soviet kids received this experience of organizational leadership roles, etc., but there was no idea of individual rights, autonomy, and there was even a saying, общественное выше личного, how to say it. Collective is more important than personal.
Makarenko.
Yeah. So when we talk about self-management, we can say that Soviet system developed some self-management skills, but not as independent, autonomous person. Your activity should be subordinated and work for common purpose. And again, when this thing, in fact, I guess, tells us that there is some contradiction between two competences that we are going to develop. One is self-management, independent action, etc., and another is collective action, work collaboratively. Again, Soviet experience showed that there is a contradiction and there are tensions, and we cannot ignore that. And in fact, that was a problem when Soviet Russia moved to market economy. We found that we really lack the entrepreneurial behavior, independent entrepreneurial behavior of the kids. And on thinking is an interesting competence to look at the Soviet experience. In fact, at early stage, experimental educators, and you noted that, had thinking as part of their agenda, and they developed type of reflective thinking so when students finished the day of work in the complexes, they came together and discussed what they did. So the reflection was the normal part of the work. But when this was replaced by traditional subjects, one could say that at least creative thinking almost disappeared. And it existed in math and science within the math and science curriculum, but it didn't exist in humanities and social studies. And there was a kind of interesting, there was a critical thinking, I would say, but it was rather Marxian dogmatism. It was critical toward bourgeois to capitalist society. So we were trained to criticize other societies, but not ours.
Judgmental.
Interesting, in the 60s, when there was a kind of period of liberalization of political regime, an interesting attempt to develop thinking skills as a part, as a mandatory student objective for the curriculum happened. Famous philosopher published in the teacher's newspaper, the only teacher's newspaper in Russia, an article called "School Must Teach Thinking," and very interesting, innovative curriculum based on Vygotsky's ideas was developed and implemented in some schools. But in 80s, the history repeated itself because the experimental school was closed. The Professor Davidov, in fact, one of my teachers, who developed this curriculum, he was at that time well known. He was a member of American Academy of Sciences. His books were translated within the famous Berkeley project on Russian mathematical education. He was fired and the experiment was closed. It kind of reappeared in Russian times, but in Soviet times it was closed. And on literacy, I guess that, again, here we're similar to England in a sense, because after 40s, the idea was that literacy sits within the mandatory requirement for primary or 8th grades graduates. So, and in fact, Soviets were quite good with achieving this minimal level of literacy, because schools were punished if students got unsatisfactory grade in any of subjects. So if students failed final exam, let's say in grade 5, he or she would study additional time during the summer to move over the bar. Let me say a few words about students' political organizations, because when we are talking about this, especially self-management and collaboration competences, it's an interesting experience to look at and maybe to learn to avoid mistakes. Soviet authorities developed 3 levels students' political organizations, and again, they officially their participation, the membership was voluntary. Yes. But in reality, you couldn't avoid it. So every student from grade 1 to 3 should be part of Young Octobrists because of October Revolution, and they wear this funny pin with Lenin in H6. Then from grade 4 to grade 8, I guess, you had to be a member of Young Pioneer Organization, and from grade 9 to grade 10 and later, you will become a member of Young Communist Organization. And For example, young Octobrists already had a special structure. In fact, one of the founders of this system wrote a paper in 1918 that how Soviet authorities should learn from experience of Scouts organization. And in fact, when you look at especially Young Pioneer and Scouts, you would see a lot of similarity. But again, the main thing that these kids were engaged in mandatory social activities, and there was an organizational structure. There were commanders and super commanders, etc. The same happened with pioneers and komsomols. And there were romantic rituals to move from one organization to another, kind of initiation or rites of passage. Yeah, that's just for fun. You see what competences they developed, communication skills, self-organization and self-control. Self-control, that's important. But also very strong structures of social control were developed through this organization. And this poster says, we go to help adults in their work. That's the main point. And how they did it, the system was really well developed. There were hundreds of PhD dissertations on how to improve good research, by the way, how students behave in summer pioneer camps, for example. And you see the students' involvement in joint work, romantic rituals, mentoring and support of juniors, etc., etc. So, what happened? And now, in fact, yesterday we celebrated an anniversary of one of the professors at our institute. He's probably one of the most senior people here, and he was a member, active member of Komsomol. And he said to his guest, who were active members, leaders in Komsomol, and almost everyone. Yeah. So indeed, it was an interesting school of self-management, managing others, etc. And what happened after Perestroika? All these organizations were prohibited. All political activities in schools were and are prohibited still. Schools got additional autonomy, and there were attempts to introduce parts of the fashionable Western curriculum, like critical thinking. But and also there were a couple of very interesting experiments. For example, there was a school in Moscow, public school, that called itself School of Self-Determination, and they taught how to choose subject. They students wrote their own rules, etc., etc. But important thing that when this infrastructure for out of lessons activity disappeared, it was not replaced by something within the lessons, like in Canada, or it was not replaced by new out-of-school set of system of out-of-school activities like in Korea. So we went through more and more rigid traditional curriculum. There was some lip service about key competences, and still is. And now, so there were 5 curriculum reforms, but finally we went through these kind of experiments and great autonomy to quite rigid curriculum, and now new minister, we have extremely conservative Ministry of Education. She definitely is a back to basics person, and she wants to make educational standards as detailed as possible and full of factual knowledge. When I say we, I mean the Russian government, so that's, I would prefer to say the ministry, not we, during last 3 years introduced 2 additional system-wide accountability procedures for the schools based on testing every child in different subjects in different ages. So unfortunately today we we have this very nice portrait of a school graduate in the education law, like you see, ready to cooperate, able to engage in learning, project-based information and cognitive activities, respect opinions of other people. That's, by the way, that's important. Patriotism is in the first place. Okay, we can consider is the part of civic competence, because the school graduate also knows and accepts Russian civil society. But there is nothing real in curriculum process that provides that assure implementation of these objectives.
Diversity.
Yeah. So each school, according to law, should have its own program of development of meta-cognitive skills. They call it universal educational skills, personal development and socialization, spiritual and moral, etc., environmental consciousness development, but there are no instruments for assessment of monitoring of these qualities. And there are more and more instruments to assess traditional knowledge. So indeed, there are a couple of new literacy projects, and they are not in schools. So the conclusion is that we are in the stage where these lip services should be replaced by something real in the schools. And this is in fact why the foundation of Sberbank initiative.
And it means that you are going to be an ex-minister.
No.
No. So lip service will sustain.
Will sustain. Okay. So, any questions, comments?
You gave an interesting and good historical background, and I was thinking why the most probable reason that those old ideas still prevail. They are part of the consciousness of Russian educators and educational system. So you have to kind of make them explicit in order to change them.
That's a good point. In fact, some of my colleagues, young colleagues from the Institute, often tell me, why you still talking about the Soviet past? So that's a good question. But you're right, I'm talking about the Soviet past because the society is talking about the Soviet past. And I forgot to say that the new minister announced decree, the new ministry facilitated the adoption of decree of the Russian president about creating Russian students, school students movement, they call it. So it's countrywide students organization. And they really want to create it like young pioneers. So people, it's really interesting, as my junior colleagues said, it's like dinosaurs are waking up. So indeed, the idea is that we can keep the school very traditional, knowledge-oriented, very rigorous. We could have very detailed standards, and outside of school, we could have this national movement. In fact, when I think today, I thought today after Canadian and Korean presentation, where Russia could move. I, frankly speaking, think that we could move to direction of Korea, because it would be so difficult to change a almost century-long tradition of very subject-oriented teaching, very disciplined, knowledge-oriented teaching. Julian.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. You will be surprised, but at the lecture in our corporate university, she told that Finland is performing so well because you've borrowed everything from the Soviet system and from the Imperial Russian school.
Now you know, Jarko.
The minister told me. She's completely
Let me
ignorant.
tell you the story. If there was one theory behind Finnish latest basic education, that's actually Carroll and Bloom through the mastery learning concept. That was Carroll equation is that outcome is related to the multiplication of ability times time. So if you variate the time, you can have quite good results for everybody. So if there was one theory, that was that one,
Carroll.
not Carroll and then Benjamin Bloom.
Julia, next
It's
time
called
you meet her,
mastery learning.
tell her.
It's mastery learning. But anyway, this is the history of Finnish education or Canadian education, and most clearly United Kingdom. They are there. It's somehow in the skeleton of the educational system is the history of its formation.
Well, and in terms of history, and I know, Christoph, you were going to comment, but just following on that, I'm wondering in terms of our project and our cases, can we and should we write these things without having some sort of contextualization? Because the political context, I'm saying, can we do it without that? We need that context to understand.
Sure.
What's happening, but also why is it or is it not seemingly successful?
But in fact, I fully agree, but we probably have to think about what we should take from the context. And I guess that maybe based on the diversity of presentations today, we could say that we have to look at the context that influences the value of content knowledge, for example, like when you consider literate person as a person who really knows a lot, and the value of skills versus knowledge, value of individual autonomy. When we put all this, so
The approach
not,
is called
not just the context.
outcome is a function.
So when I'm talking about the context, we have to be quite
Specific.
specific.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Let me add some.
If your ability is fixed and you
Sure.
increase time,
I think it
outcomes.
was a very excellent account. I enjoyed listening to Isaac. But
Because you remember your pioneer time.
yeah, but just what did happen with this Stalin reform? Because perhaps some issues. First of all, it was kind of returning back to what was before revolution. It was explicitly not pronounced, but it was an attempt to return back to decades before this Jewish type project. Also, the country was like less than 20% of population was literate. So it was enormous explosion of literacy, formal literacy. And then the goal was first, as Isaac mentioned, as this ideological uniformity, but also it was what was called industrialization. So the kind of coming to industrial society from pre-industrial, from agricultural society to industrial society. So we needed millions and millions of people who are capable to at least to read instruction, to understand what they are said, or calculate, etc. So it was kind of incremental to make these reforms.
Yeah, maybe.
So,
yeah. So it was more literacy project
Yeah.
than education. Yeah.
Well, let me ask, because I know, for example, the vocational education was very well actually also presented in theory. It might be called technological problem solving. Some of the Farapanova and some other older Russian scholars were discussing the advantage of vocational education in introducing kind of vocational thinking where you could understand the nature of machines and equipments. And that was related partly to your polytechnic education. And that is something which should be remembered. I mean, that was very useful, the descriptions of experiments which were done. And for what comes to problem solving, you had a Pushkin. You had one person in the Academy of Sciences developing these actually creative thinking methods. I remember his heuristics, it was called. So within your tradition, you have already had many of those tools which are considered important nowadays.
But yes, there were some. As I mentioned, there was this great experiment with thinking curriculum.
Yes,
and in fact, it was part of these curriculum ideas were taken in the Netherlands by famous math education Hugo Freudenthal.
Freudenthal.
Yeah, and Americans. But it was not part of this massive machine. Or it was a small part, and mainstream education. You would be surprised with all statements about polytechnic education. Soviet science education didn't include a real discussion on new equipment, when we studied radio, we learned very little about the devices. We learned a lot about the physics laws behind that. And it's interesting because the idea was that part of the students will go to vocational schools and they will learn about the devices.
Okay.
Colleagues, we are doing great in respect to the schedule, and we can have a coffee and final session in 25 minutes. You can
Stretch
not
our
25,
legs
20.
in 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes. Let's come back at 4.
Еще много комментариев к докладу без сюжета.
Хреново, да?
Ну, это уже не так хреново, как было. Но лучше попытаться и пытаться. Ну, я так.
That's why I haven't been like
Ну, правильно, правильно.
I think he should just take a look and I'll be back.
Ну ладно, потом, конечно, интересно будет посидеть и посмотреть все-таки, ну, почему так получилось.
Что именно?
Ну, они некомпетентны, у них подход
Юля,
несовместим.
я могу открыть окошко?
Да.
Почему да?
Давай. Если не на 2 часа,
Нет, просто вот
Да,
перерыв.
то есть я пытаюсь понять, это их подход, это их ценность, это их уровень, это их задачи. Ну, то есть, ну, как бы они с нами вообще вот совместимы.
Я бы сказал, что это консалтинг.
Консалтинг консалтингу.
Я не знаю, бывает ли консалтинг лучше, может быть, на кейсе лучше.
Но они этого не понимают. То есть у них
Tomorrow, 20 centigrades.
How many?
20, 21.
And the rain.
Hopefully
Okay.
not minus 21.
No, it's good, and then Thursday, raining again, right?
It's конечно. Wait, I didn't ask traditional tourist question. This is your first time in Russia? Your first time in Russia?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Your first time?
Yeah.
Yeah, your first time.
Yep.
Mine are good. First time.
Maybe everybody is the first time.
Except Yarko and Christoph, I think.
Yeah. Christoph, you've been in Soviet Union or in Russia before, right?
Once.
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 So,
In Moscow.
yeah, Yarko is we are very happy to have him as relatively frequent visitor. We learned that only you and Christoph visited Russia before.
Yes, I have several times. My passport is full of visa to Russia. I don't know how many pages.
Next time you go to the States, it could be.
Yes, I was there.
You could be questioned.
We were in Seattle, and but they only want to know
visa
if
is
I am
very similar
having
to
guns
the
or
American
drugs.
Almost identical. So you obviously copy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they follow the stupid idea of reciprocity. Not maybe stupid, but
No. But
painful. As soon as British visa survey contains something like 140 questions for the Russians. So
That's nutty.
Russians created the same
number.
questionnaire for Brits. Bad idea. They have to learn from us how to cooperate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask about a practical thing. If and when you might be coming to Finland, what would be the good set of days? We know that we have the early conference in Tampere from 26th of August to 2nd of September. Then my group, we will have other discussions with Heidelberg group or Luxembourg on complex problem solving from the 3rd of September, that's Sunday. However, on 8th of September there will be an English dissertation, public defendants. One of my students defends her thesis on comparing Fullan and Hargreaves. That's in English, so you might have an option to have a look on how Finnish doctoral dissertations are being publicly examined. We follow a very old tradition and walking there, and we have our hats and whatever.
Oh, nice.
So that's on 8th off. But that day will be then off. So one option is, let's say, do you want to have only working days for working, or do you want to use also Sundays or something? In the middle of that second week of September it could be then, because then that 8th of September might be included as an interesting Finnish experience. And my plan is...
a telephone
Oh,
on the table.
Or should we consult with emails to find the days? let me see. Hello, that's August. Friday 8 is the day for the dissertation. My major friend and student, another, she's presenting, she has been applying for the full professorship, which of course it makes sense, but she has to prepare her public lecture for 6th of September, so I would not like to disturb her before. So preferable days in the second week of September would be from 7th upward. And I have nothing in my calendar for the next week, and not even for the next one. You know, I'm a retired person my wife is also a retired professor. We take tram every day, 8 to 8:30, and go to the university.
That's what being retired is.
Children think
Gotcha.
we are stupid. And they're right. But anyway, that means that I do have a lot of options to accept you. And if there would be 2 days, my proposal would be that I would order a bus. We would go from Helsinki to our countryside. It's called small city called Hanko. There is a very good hotel and very new spa, swimming pool and all the treatments. It's one of the best in Northern Europe now for a few weeks.
That sounds like the right
It's on the and then you would see the Finnish nature. It's
Nice.
really organized by the sea. But it depends now. Is it possible really? The last week of August is not very good.
So it sounds like you're saying the second week
Second week
or the
might be a
third
good
week of
way.
September.
Yes.
And I think in general, I mean, obviously planning sooner rather than later is better because then people's schedules aren't already booked.
So does it mean, for example, second week of September start on the 4th?
Yes.
So
So it could be that way but I would prefer that our serious meetings would start latest or let's say earliest on Thursday.
yeah,
Because
but maybe even into the
Yes.
following week.
Yes.
So even if we arrived on,
and if that is not possible, then the whole week is free for us. Then she has to cope with this situation. If that week is, generally speaking,
but
possible.
Jarkko was saying the 8th onward, Isak.
7th onwards, yeah?
Yes.
From
7th onward.
7th would be most optimal. Then you would have 1 day to follow Finnish academic traditions and to see Helsinki around, and then we might have discussion already on Thursday, or latest, that would mean then Sunday and Saturday. Saturday and Sunday.
Saturday and leave on Sunday.
Yes. I know that you are all looking seriously to your... So there are disturbances in any way.
Why don't we put
We're fine.
preliminary dates for the September meeting in Helsinki? From 7th, arriving on 7th, leaving on 10th.
Yes, good.
And Vitaly, who is not here, but
Yes.
Maria will instruct him, will send everyone the table to fill if you are able to come.
Yes.
Just to be sure in writing, because I also have to look at my schedule.
Yes. And it is always possible to skip the dissertation, so we could have working days for 8th and 9th.
Okay.
But I have to be there, I mean.
Yeah.
And we have a karanka in the evening, so I cannot be away from that. But you might be invited to the party. We are following a Russian Swedish tradition. After dissertation, there is a drinking party. For Europe, we call it karanka.
On the new PH,
Yes.
the
He will be paying the expenses, but we might give some money to her to take
I
us.
criticize it.
But
strongly.
it's not a real problem. But I have to be there in.
Okay.
That's my moral obligation, and
That's the 8th.
so
That's on the 8th, right?
that's
We
no
understand
way.
that, yeah. Dear colleagues,
Sometimes
We,
it's quite cute money.
we have the following
20%,
items
for instance.
to discuss.
Never.
And thanks, Yarko, for bringing up already one of the items, which is the September meeting. But we also wanted to reaffirm that we, after our conversation, why don't we look again, if we find the list, the page, on the very positive there. To look at country chapter or country case outline, and just yeah, it was table like that.
Yes.
And there was so just after we got some presentation of country cases.
Country cases. Nine points.
9 questions.
A tentative outline.
The tentative outline. Should we change it? I have a very simple question. So let's look for 3 minutes at that, and if you think that we should add
A short description of the country's
Just specify, for example.
educational structure.
Yeah, 0 chapter part 0 will be description of the education system.
Yes. The Canadian explanation was actually very beautiful. But anyway.
So, вот они лежат. Okay. So maybe following Michelle's suggestion, in part 1 we can add some historical context. Yeah, historical and political context.
The curriculum transformation.
Yeah, some background, yeah, in brackets, including historical and political context, because definitely in Korean case it was very interesting, this happy education program, political. And I guess our Chinese colleagues also can I can provide something. I saw the reference on National Institute of Research document with this. Yeah. So there, and I know that National Institute for Studies in Education or Educational Sciences now working on China Education 2030 strategy, something like that. So you can.
Isaac,
Yeah.
for the historical context, can I suggest that we do all try to do something on the structure of education, so how we chunk our systems,
Yeah.
when people transfer from one to another.
So that's the 0, I think, description of the education system.
The other thing is, along with where curriculum reform, what is happening in curriculum reform at the moment, something on assessment.
Yeah.
So where are the assessment points in the system?
Yes.
And also something on selection or streaming, because the Canadian example was talking about, I'm not going to remember the term, it's differentiated instruction. We would call that probably mixed ability teaching, so that you don't separate out by ability. But I was having some discussion with our Korean and Chinese colleagues about what they do in that area, and I think it would be useful to know. Plus, the other thing that always intrigues me is the presence or absence of textbooks,
Yeah.
because I think that's also an element in how people are able to think
Absolutely.
about what reform should be, and it's been there in some people's accounts, but not in everybody's.
And technology.
I think that would probably be worth adding in,
Yes.
actually. I mean, we certainly have had a big push on getting technology into classrooms, so every classroom will have an interactive whiteboard.
So are these the elements that would go into the description of the education system? Like if we had a list of the
Yeah,
things
yeah.
that we just
Yeah,
will
Maria-
remember that
Maria-
we'll all include
Maria
those, right?
collects all
Exactly.
comments
Yeah.
and will send
Yeah.
the revised version for your approval in a few days.
Yeah. Perfect.
One observation of this tentative outline is that it is using. I am not an English speaker, but anyway, if someone is using how the transition was communicated, and we are talking about 21st century skills, because that has not happened. So, in one sense, in this tentative case, there must be some description of how reforms are communicated in England or in Canada, because I would say that English persons would say how the transition is planned to be communicated 1920. I mean, the tenses are here not correct, really, in relation to a thing which is not even taken place in many countries.
Also, listening today, I think that we might, instead of strong word failures in item number 9, to use issues, major or typical issues or
Failures.
challenges, because it's not just, what was the most difficult thing?
So challenges?
Challenges,
We have successes, maybe, rather than best
Yeah, so
practice.
I believe failures is more honest, and the challenges are diplomatic, but it spoils the idea.
Diplomatic and maybe too vague.
Therefore, yeah.
Well, except that actually, if you do put in challenge, everybody has got a challenge.
Yes.
If you put in a failure, only some of us will put up our hands. and
I
say
agree.
failure.
I think challenges is specific enough, and that certainly, at least for us, it connotes difficulties.
I will
Right?
give you an example of when the Finnish basic education was instituted. There was within math and languages streaming system, the 3 levels. The lowest level was such that there was no continuing to secondary education, and boys started to select that.
Yes.
That was a disaster. That was a
failure.
kind of failure,
Yes,
and that
not a
needed
test.
to be corrected. And that was done by simply extending the law. Everybody can go. So it was easily solved, and the streaming disappeared because it was not any more useful.
Excellent example. Thank you.
And things like that have happened.
Failures or challenge. Okay.
Okay.
It's for our use. It's not.
Exactly.
We are not going to put it anywhere. So
Finland expressed that its biggest failure was this period. BBC takes that as a news.
Failure is a challenge.
also,
Every challenge is a failure.
colleagues, after Gemma mentioned tracking of students, should we pay special attention in describing of what's going on issues of equality, or they are too general for our specific goals?
Given the Canadian case presentation, which was quite close to one which I would have liked to present from Finland, equality and special education is an important part of increasing the mean level of the whole country. If that is forgotten, you cannot really get high results. So inclusion.
Inclusion we already put.
But equality is actually.
What do you mean by equality? It's the same as equity?
Yeah. Again, English, native English speakers would tell you probably differently, but I use them.
That's the gist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the same, okay.
Okay, so
It's okay.
we've done, and yes.
In number 5, we differentiate between free service, teacher training, and
And
in-service.
we put both. Okay, that's important.
What's retraining?
Our students always ask when examination is given, how many pages? How many pages?
Okay, that's by the way, that's very good question, and let's let's talk about that. How many pages?
Maria said between 1 and 50.
For each question,
Up
yeah?
to- okay. You know, I'm a mathematician by training, but I'm not good with the number of
7.
signs
10.
of words. But usually when we write something for the book, it's between 5,000 and 9,000 words, right? Something like that. It's especially if you think about then converting that into the chapter for a comparative book. Let's say something between 6,000 and 9,000 words.
Could you count it in signs? In characters?
Divide, it's about 10 pages or 15 pages.
Okay. The number of characters is
Not
probably
nine
the most precise, and I used to.
It's not characters.
We are using more. Finnish language is a long one.
It's
We need
words.
more.
It's words. Yeah.
It's a unit. It's 40,000 characters.
Something like that.
It's a standard unit of.
30 pages.
We are
I
using
will ask
very long
one of
words.
our
So,
graduate students,
so
Natasha,
Right.
check how many pages normally. It's again, I do remember that.
Знаков, конечно, символов.
Мы в словах говорим, words.
Вот такой принцип.
Неважно. Вот, так сказать.
So how many words?
Okay.
8,000.
8,000.
Подожди, есть low context, а есть high context languages, так что надо еще...
We put, no, but we'll translate everything in English. So,
It's 40,000. 8,000. Good.
yeah.
Roughly
So
30
between
pages.
It's
just
an article. It's
Elizabeth
full
just
article.
reminded me, and we shared
40,000.
that 9,000. It's about 30 pages.
Double
In-
spaced.
In
Double
in
spaced.
normal. So between 6 and 6,000 is 20. So let's put it between 7 and 9, and it gives us
Which question?
for each question, for each chapter.
Excellent.
Fine.
Yeah, we are in Leo Tolstoy's land, so yeah, 4 volumes is our. There were,
Ну, то есть 30 страниц на странном.
да,
So we agreed 8,000
between 7 and 9,000 words.
between 7 and 9.
But you can add.
10 вопросов.
Good.
It's enough, yeah. But again, if you need appendix, it's okay.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think
That's a
this,
good idea.
We are talking about the interesting text, colleagues. We want
The essence.
our chapters to be read and quoted. So let's have a good energetic text, like in fact all of you presented today, and we can have in appendices any tables, lists of subjects if we want. If they
No, I think we will want to, you know,
Yes, that's quite possible.
because it's important to be able to to look holistically at, else there will be too many questions. And so I think if all should go into appendix in terms of supportive materials, but I think they should be there.
Okay. Okay, that's so we've done with the country cases. Now, dear colleagues, we have two items to discuss left. One is timeline for the project, and frankly speaking, I didn't have time to talk to Julia about the end date, because currently, Julia, because we had some delay in the beginning, Maria and I suggested
А вот как было? С чем сравнивать?
Был конец.
no, current timeline that
This is the current timeline.
this is-
Okay, no, not the new one. Okay.
no, that's
Not
a
the
current.
suggested. Okay.
And we would suggest to you to change just two last dates. So we know that you wanted to present the report at St. Petersburg Economic Forum in June 2018, but we can present. It's possible if we do everything else according to the schedule, but to be on the safe side, I would suggest that we do a panel at St. Petersburg Economic Forum and present findings of the report as a presentation. And then it's a beautiful time in St. Petersburg. We could stay for 2 or 3 weeks. You can that's. I wanted to say days, but I'm thinking. You can bring your family and stay there. By the way, we have a great place outside in one of the former Tsar's
I have
residences.
already advertised it to everyone.
Yes, that was a nice place.
Yeah, that looked
Yeah. So, and then we can finish writing based on the discussion, and because we know that the main client is the president of your bank, and I'm sure that if you present something to him, he will ask us to change. So we have to have time to do that.
So what's the suggested?
The suggestion is to deliver it in July 2018, not
Instead of June?
instead.
No, I think that's okay. As long as we are ready to present at PMEF,
At the forum, at
in the
forum.
forum, yes, the key
Yes.
results, the release is okay.
So, colleagues, we can start from the end, and we can put in the second page that June, sometime in June, usually it's first weeks of June, and we'll know about that in a couple of months, I guess, or maybe even earlier. There will be the biggest international forum in Russia called St. Petersburg Economic Forum. This year, Putin and Prime Minister of India and President of Austria and former Prime Minister of Finland were there. It's really a big gathering, and we can. Our funders want us to have a panel there to present the results, together with World Bank and Boston Consulting Group. Am I right?
Well, World Bank, yes. In terms of Boston, they are releasing the report now.
They released.
So
They released the report about the labor market.
yes.
So, and could we have an access to their report, by the way?
When
As
it's
soon as
released,
it
yes,
will
I think
be
it will be released in a couple of weeks. So
Okay.
of course.
So, and then after this, that's usually it's very interesting event. And after that, we can stay for 3 days in quiet place to have a writing session, finalizing session. And then we will not need April writing session. Okay. So we fixed, and then it will go through the editing, etc., etc. So end of July we'll have the report, and Sberbank is going to disseminate it, right?
Конечно.
Okay.
But we will work out a plan.
Okay. Dissemination. Okay. Let's now look at the first page to look at 4-hour framework and chapters other than country chapter. Other than country chapter. You see that by June 14 we are revising the presentation of the competencies and literacies.
Not the whole presentation, but only the slides where
The framework.
is there.
The framework. We'll send it to you for your feedback. We expect feedback in 9 days, and
No,
we have from 14 to 23. Okay, and for the time being, we'll have it as a working draft. Maria and our team here promise to prepare draft of the chapters 1-3, framework, social implications, and psychological foundation, and we'll send it to you for your comments, revision, and suggestions for boxes. And we are going to discuss it during the seminar in Helsinki. And after that, by December 1, the next version of these introductory chapters will be ready. Any comments on that? And another question, and you don't need to answer it immediately, but maybe by June 23. Any who wants to volunteer to write part of chapters on psychology or psychological foundation or social implications, we would be happy. I was going to ask Gemma to help with literacy discussion. Maybe we can talk about that. But any comments, questions on that? No. Then, more sensitive, we go to country cases timeline. By June 15, we sent you the suggestions for the structure of comparative tables. That kind of simple comparative scheme that we discussed to describe countries, etc. Then we, Masha, could you explain what you mean by orientations for best practices?
I used the silly word pegs. You didn't like it.
Yeah, PECs. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
because
like-
I don't. So could you explain to English speakers? They will help us with the word.
Something like milestones or benchmarks or something that will make our descriptions of best practices and challenges comparable. So it's not just some bulk of some text, but something well structured, so that we can have some ticks that it fills into this issue.
Right, so that the same way that when we were just talking about the description of the systems, and we said we need to talk about assessment, we need to talk about streaming, we need to talk about, we want a set of those things that we want to include. Guidelines?
Something
But-
like guidelines, like some issues to focus on,
Yes.
pay attention to.
But
What is
you
the
will
paper
send
we are
it,
now looking?
Maria. You will send
International
it
report.
to us, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I will send our
So that's
suggestions.
your problem. We'll
But we
we'll
know
wait
and we know what you,
see.
so we know that it's
and
these kind
and
of
thank you.
yeah. Guidelines.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Fine.
will send out
Guidelines or
these.
suggestions.
Yes,
maybe,
yes.
suggestions.
Any suggestion
you
will be
will-
welcome.
And I would ask you then to try to prepare a couple of examples, and
Yes.
we will see whether it works or not.
Yeah, sure. It's, because it's very
Okay,
vague.
okay.
Good practices. Well, I need guidance, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here we are facing a problem, not unsolvable. It's to describe good or bad practices must be related then to reforms. I mean, here we need a more theoretical thinking in order to make a case illustrative. As such, there are intended consequences and there are unintended consequences. And most of the pilot things and exercises in Finnish education or Canadian or Russian or wherever, there are good intention always. And sometimes they fail. Sometimes we know as researchers that cannot work, but the power is not with us. But anyway, they are examples of attempts to control and manage educational systems, because no system can remain unchangeable. It needs changes all the time. The world, no system is so rigid that nothing happens. So all small things are coming all the time. And here, small things are relevant and interesting, but not perhaps generally, unless the general aspects are shown to be. And sometimes you need real research to make good example of successful or unsuccessful things. And therefore it's not it's relatively difficult to give short descriptions of failures or successes.
I think the issue here is that we will have to differentiate somehow between large-scale good practices and like minor good practices, smaller scale good practices, because the examples that Elizabeth provided while talking about Canada, like inquiry-based learning, differentiated approach to teaching, these are also good practices. And if you describe them like in the context of some teaching in the classroom, this will also make a good practice, but it won't be a very large scale. It is not the success of the reform on the whole.
Excuse me, Maria, what is practice? When something is inscribed as an inquiry-based education, is it practice or not?
This is why I would like to think about some guidelines.
Well,
But
it partly depends upon what the funder wants. In other words, if the emphasis is designed to rest at scale, all right, so driving policy at scale, large-scale education reform is itself quite a difficult enterprise. The alternative would be to go for a critical case. So we might, rather than taking everything there is to know about OISE in this section, which can be in the country case study, actually OISE could be we could pick across each country a critical case that might be smaller than the large-scale program, but actually illustrates something about the process of change. So it might be, therefore, that in relation to what's been put on the table, differentiated instruction could be the thing that might be most useful for Canada.
Yeah, but for us, because we want to operationalize it, so we don't want it only for policy making, but we want to be able to act on the results of the report, not only with promoting policy making, because it may never happen. We are doing it, as a step. But what is within our control is to try to implement some of the stuff, and that's why the instruments and success stories and successful practices and instruments would be of equal value, and from a practical perspective, even I think sometimes more.
So that sounds like something that a teacher could read.
Yes.
It's the audience
teacher.
here is for a teacher to be able to take
Yes.
it. It's not trying to broker to a policymaker.
Not only, I would say, we are trying to, yes,
A
teacher,
or
headmaster,
friend.
or even a parent.
I think that's important
Yes,
to be able
yes.
to state that and know it
Well,
in advance.
And there may be some variety then,
Yes,
right? And so
absolutely.
we're picking what makes sense in our context as you said this earlier, what's a key thing? What if there's a big idea, and the big idea doesn't have to be about the large scale.
No.
The big idea could be about
But
a
be a
smaller
good idea.
scale, could be a good idea.
Okay, so,
Yes.
excuse me, my question is, what kind of evidence is needed to present a good practice? So is it enough to be convinced that it is a good practice, or we need something, some ethnographic research or data?
Christoph, yeah, we understand the question, I guess, and when you started to ask about the practice, I remembered the name of your institute, Evidence Institute, and I think that maybe we have to avoid the word the best practice for this.
We already
very
substituted it for successes, I think.
success, yeah, and challenges. Yeah, because in order to even success could be a strong word. Someone could suggest it as an interesting practice, because we know that popular practice. By the way, that's also
That's another thing.
I'm not so happy about that one.
yeah. Okay, popular. Yeah.
Flavor of the
Mindfulness
month.
is a popular thing.
But
Yeah.
maybe I think the idea of a critical case, because actually I have spoken about the disaster that is in England at the level of policy, but again on the OISI slides there was work around metacognition, what they badged as character resilience, encouraging children to reflect on their learning. There is work going on that in England, led by an organisation that isn't part of government, that's done something very interesting in terms of getting schools to reflect on themselves. So if we are thinking of a critical case, that particular case has very good research evidence. It's not my personal pick, it's not my opinion.
What is it called?
It's called the MITA.
Okay.
Might.
It's the best example we have currently under our crazy system of somebody making something work despite the policy environment, not because of the policy environment.
It was exactly.
So, Christoph,
Yes.
I would respond by the following way. We are experts. We represent best. Some of us best, some of us good.
Yes.
Education, and so we can, if we have already evidences, we can mention them. If this is our expert opinion, it's fine. It's fine, because again, this is expert. We are expert panel, so I would not. I would be not worried about that at that stage, but I will come to this evidence thing later on if we have time to discuss the research agenda. Because I started to say that we have two items left to discuss. First is the timeline, and the second probably the ideas for future research and additional research. So coming back to the country cases, the important thing that we expect from you by August 10th some sketchy draft. This is very soft word, as I understand, sketchy draft.
We accept the semantic game reference.
And it's important to have it in mid-August, we can have it by August 15, because it would be great if everyone could read it, and then we could have our comments. So rather, I would prefer in Helsinki, other than I had a pleasure to work under famous American educator Jim Banks on multicultural education. And he was an editor of the comparative book, and he made us to read every chapter, and then when we met, there were no presentations of individual chapter, but just discussion on it. So it would be an ideal. We'll see how it will work. So in this case, in September, you will get feedback, and that's it. And the final versions of chapters we expect by December, really. No, by February. February. Maria,
Yes, by February, but I'm not sure that we will.
You are a very
prepare
kind person. Yes.
I'm not kind person, but I am not sure we shall be preparing them bit by bit.
I'm
not
also
just a succession of
so
pieces.
could we, instead of having look this at the second stage, Maria initially suggested different parts of the country chapters, but maybe it doesn't make sense. We can have full chapters by December. I guess it's
By December.
From August to December.
Okay.
It will make our life, each of us, easier, safer.
No, it will not, but we always accept time dates which are so late as possible.
Okay, full chapters.
We'll send it around.
So December 17.
December 17. Yes.
December 7th.
December
Before Christmas.
2017.
7.
Yes.
Not 17.
This year.
Full draft.
Yeah, not this.
And over dinner, we'll tell you what in North America, and I don't know, it's probably different, and what young people say what sketchy is.
Right.
Sketchy is something a little bit different. It's not a bad thing, but it's just,
That's good.
it's dubious. If it's something that's like not quite, okay, it's like maybe a bit dangerous. So it could be our sketchy drafts.
Okay, colleagues, we have also another item in our timeline, which is not really a timeline, but let's discuss it. When we exchanged the letters with the deans, and now we have all letters of intent signed, etc., etc., we agreed that, and in fact, some of the deans agreed quite enthusiastically, that we'll support the workshop through the small grant that your institutions receive. Will support not we, but the fund, our funder, will support the small or big, it's up to you, workshops on the topics close to the main topic. So it could be learning to learn. It could be new literacies. It could be out of lessons activities. In fact, I really I'm fascinated by Korean experience, how they manage that. It would be great to have. So now you have an idea, better idea about the project. Why don't you come back, you think, and within June, or maybe, it would be better to fix it in June, you will talk to your colleagues. I see that something like you or consortium announces an international workshop, and we invite people, and as I remember from our agreement, the HSC and our funders support our travel of members of consortium, if you like to come, but other people come as normal academics, I'm sure that if OEC announces such a workshop, people from Hong Kong will come by their own. In fact, you can just have, again, it's up to you and Glenn to decide, but maybe just Ontario experience in developing key competences or specific competences would be a great topic. And you prepare using the grant money, you can hire someone to do the logistics, the organization, and we come speak if you like, or we can listen also. So, would you think about these possibilities? What about? Yeah, it's okay. We can talk in July when I'm in Beijing. That's okay. Super. So we put that again. We sent in a couple of days. We send you this as a reminders and expect your ideas within June. Okay. Fine. Maria, and when our last chapter will be ready, recommendations to Russia.
Oh, I forgot.
You cannot.
I just didn't include it in here because
they will appear. They will pop up.
By December probably. Simultaneously.
Okay, you will put it.
Yeah. Give some.
So, Julia, may I ask
Otherwise, we're sort of making
you, are you satisfied with this timeline?
Yes.
Super. Here we have a seal of approval. Great. Now,
Isaac, just before you move on, because we put some potential topics, you suggested some potential topics. Is there any point at UCL, we have a very strong comparative education department. Would there be any point in bringing a comparative education expert or some experts to just talk about ground rules for comparison from that? I mean, you've obviously got a lot of experience in this area, but my feeling is that the team, some people, Yalko has worked a lot in constructing cross-country cases, but not all of us have. So would it be useful to actually bring some expertise in that area into the conversation at some point?
Oh, Gemma, thank you very much for reminding the important question I wanted to ask you. And frankly speaking, I did already a couple of comparative books, and I'm editing now. Now one is in Palgrave and one is in Sage. I'm co-editor, and I feel that it would be better if I have a special training in comparative education. But it's for comparative books, the substance of the and if you like, the spices in country cases are more important than comparative methodology, because comparative methodology, on the simplest way, is just to have strong outline that is sensitive to the context. So it shouldn't be like I was invited to write to the comparative book on community colleges, and I said there are no community colleges in Russia, and they said, oh, but we want to have a Russian case, so then you should call it differently. They said, no, we have a grant for community colleges. Yeah. So the framework should be sensitive and inclusive, but I think that if and indeed UCL and England, another. I know Keith Levin. He is from Sussex, I guess. There is a big comparative institute. So we could have an interesting discussion on comparative education policy with a focus on key competences and policy making, for example. It's up to you. But when we think about possible research and publications, I guess that here I would suggest to think about maybe other experts. In fact, I was thinking about, even we don't have more money, and I was thinking, taking into account this wonderful Australian book about inviting Australians at least to share their experience.
But we will discuss, because I think, we wanted to have Singapore and Australia as two...
No, Singapore, the dean wrote me private letter that they are overwhelmed with international exposure, and they told everything that they could. They would be happy to participate if we suggest research. But we can, frankly speaking, indeed, there are probably in our overview of other countries, we will include Singapore.
So you're going to do overview of other countries, yeah?
Yeah, when we have an overview of best practices and other policies, we'll do not in-depth analysis. But Australians are very good in, and indeed they are pioneers in collaborative, in assessment of collaboration skills. And Patrick Griffin, he agreed to participate in our project as a representative.
But not for the country case, yeah?
Yeah, but no, initially we talked about his participation as a representative of the University of Melbourne, and the dean was okay, but Patrick was commissioned 100% of his time by UNESCO, so he's ready to review our materials. Yes.
But I think we will be prepared to talk. I cannot personally make these decisions, but if we make a good case, I think there is a possibility that we will be able to extend the grant to include Australia. And I also thought that we are missing Scandinavian bit, completely.
You are sitting with Finland.
Well, I mean,
Finland is not a good example of Scandinavia.
No, I mean.
No, I understand your point. It's
Finland is for me is a separate,
yes.
case.
Yes.
But
there is one. That's good. I mean, there is one topic which is seldom. It has been kind of been studied, but that is how this discussion about cross-curricular competencies, key competencies, and 21st century skills as a movement, which is now penetrating the whole system. As such, that is so interesting. I know that in England, OECD is either the wolf or the sheep. I mean, OECD is the capitalistic countries' invention to promote capitalistic ideas, a global market. Well, I have nothing against it, but anyway, OECD is not without. I think it's a wolf, not a sheep. But anyway, and then the European Union, Finland and United Kingdom and Poland, we are part of the European Union, and that is important. Gemma informed that, I have learned that even earlier, England is against most of these European Union political programs, also in relation to education. They are saying no to everything. They have said for 10 years they are not participating in any empirical work which would be paid by the European Union, simply because they knew that they have been over-testing their children. But the cross-curricular competencies as a movement appeared in the middle 90s, then
So what? Sorry for interrupting.
that kind of
But
research.
the
The point is that we need comparative studies. We need information either ordered by us or looked for of these movements, because they are one of the reasons we are here.
I think we shall be preparing some overview for you to review.
Yes, that's part of the evidence.
part of the.
But the interpretation of what's going on is still lacking. You have produced a beautiful set of list of documents,
Yeah.
but that's not yet an analysis what's
Yeah.
happening.
But
And England, they have been there are very interesting separation. Government policy and and academic
but-
discourse, they are fighting each other all the time. So England, therefore, these
elaborate.
comparative studies might be of interest somehow to be included
Yes.
within us.
Yes, look, colleagues, we have 30 minutes, and first, I have two questions left for the discussion, but then we have something over the glass of wine as well. But first, we started to discuss what countries, experience of what countries should we also cover. And it's important for Julia to hear that, because she wants to make a case
Scandinavia
for the
and
fund.
Denmark might be of interest. Also Sweden, because everything is going down and they must find ways to go up. So it will be, so far it's a disaster like England, but no country can tolerate that position. Not
So
England.
we have Sweden, Australia.
Yes.
In Asia, I guess we are well represented.
Yes.
We don't have Latin America,
What about the Netherlands?
Netherlands. We do have, from continental Europe, we have Poland, but we might think about, I don't know really.
They have the
but-
best schools. Yeah? No?
Switzerland is also very good. So if
Interesting, Netherlands doesn't have
The
strong,
equity is enormous.
single strong school of education. They are very distributed.
In the Netherlands would be interested because the distribution is extremely compact. So they have no slow people and bright people. All pupils are in the relatively narrow range, and it is definitely a result of policy. So not to produce outliers, as to say. Would be interested to see how they achieved and what is the justification for that.
Okay, so colleagues, let's think if you have any other ideas also, Maria. Let's then we remind colleagues and they might come with other ideas. So we collect them and present to.
Yeah, but we need to do it
Julia.
before we go to Gref. I
Yes,
think
Gref is
that's,
the chairman of the bank. Okay, then the next question is about possible research topics. And frankly, I don't know, the grant that we have is not research grant, it's a policy document. But nobody prohibits us to do some research work and publish. One topic was suggested by Jarko already. So to look from the educational policy perspective, what's going on and why in different countries we have this. And we also, I guess that English experience is extremely interesting because this country even doesn't do lip service like Russia or Poland. They just openly, it's partially like new American education secretary, back to basics. We witnessed that before. So maybe we can brainstorm just topics and then we can circulate them. And if I know that colleagues from China are interested in education policy as well. So we might create small groups within our group to write something together. I mean, academically. Any possible research questions related to this big agenda?
From Canada, I would like to see what happens with that PISA follow-up study. PISA up to after 15, because that's the major.
15?
After 15, they have the biggest sample of PISA tested persons. They have followed them about almost 10 years. And I would like to know what happens when they are really in the labor market. So, that would be very, very relevant for discussions around the future of PISA and the relevance of that.
Elizabeth, that's exactly
And
false in your field, I guess.
Canada
Please,
statistics, but your group, OEC, was part of that
Gemma,
research
please,
team.
I've just been wondering really on the basis of what Julia was saying earlier on, because if I stop going on about where the English government has gone wrong in education, what they have done is they by not being there is space for other people to do things in a different kind of a way. And if I compare across the accounts I've heard, we have countries where central government is very much in control, and we then have countries with a federal system where there's opportunity for different kinds of partnerships. England is a special case insofar as there aren't any real planned partnerships, but on the other hand things bubble up. And I wonder if, given that part of what Julia has suggested is that a possibility this may not get policymakers' ear, but what else could we do with it in a Russian context? Perhaps if I were to redo my English case, I might do it by looking at a different set of players who are outside of the government discourse. They're not really universities. We have what we would call third sector brokers who maybe are more similar to yourselves and who are doing things because government isn't doing things.
It's very interesting.
So that it might be the critical case in a way from England rather than why government has messed up.
That's nice.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. I didn't realize that in Russia this movement is coming from, indeed, not from the government. So
There is some.
I just realized that you are NGO. Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
And the thing is, why I'm saying this is because we have elections next year, and we don't know who the president is going to be, what the cabinet is going to be, who is the
You
minister.
know,
You know?
We know. We are certain. We may bet.
Seem to believe to know. But
No, but
who knows?
it's close, and the context is that, you know, there are areas where we could influence as a big company. For example, we can start building alternative network of schools. Yeah.
I'm going to reframe the case from England. I can reframe it for you.
Marina, please.
For me, the question about new approaches to measurement and assessment of new skills. How to realize evidence-based approach to this new reality, especially for soft skills, like research of maybe new views, new approach to.
But and I think Isaac, I think it's worth thinking about maybe we should open a small but assessment center.
But before that, we have to do some analytical work, and then Marina.
But this can be part of the
Marina
this
is
can
right.
put a foundation, a basis on how to.
I guess that in all our cases, including Canada and including Finland and Korea, the most advanced, we didn't hear about really advanced assessment in this area. And the question and overview and analysis of the trends in assessment of soft skills. It's really a good question to discuss. I also think that, frankly speaking, when I thought about the research program, I thought about specific skills, at least meta. It's called meta-analysis, right? Institute of Education is very good with meta-analysis. Meta-analysis of what we know about different sub-competences. And from my discussion with Chinese colleagues, I guess the idea about learning to learn and preparedness to the next level of education as a competence. Because we often take it out of context. We just assess or discuss learning to learn. But many kids go from school to universities. What kind of learning they have to be prepared in school? That's what we discussed with you. Right? It's a good topic also. Any topics? So, colleagues, I know that all of you have your own research agenda already, but I would suggest to think about this opportunity. We can collect additional data, we can have an access to international data, especially if OECD will fulfill its promises and give us all data that they collected from the countries. So from education policy perspectives, I guess, for sure we have a lot of materials.
The problem-solving report of OECD should be coming out. I saw the first 2 copies 1 month ago given to Bernard Skapo, but that was only a copy of that. So the problem-solving report will be coming out, and that is already in this area where we are now moving.
Okay. We have a couple of psychologists in the team, Michelle and Marina, and Varvara. You were sitting very quietly, but you did a lot of preparation work. Maybe one of the workshops could be about psychological research around key competences. So let's think about that. We can invite good people.
We are just collected new data on the 9th graders. We have replicated in the same schools 3 times, 2001, 2011, and now we have samples of 6,000. And we are now checking this downward movement of motivation and outcomes. And that the data has been now just collected and we are starting to analyze. So this long-term changes in our way of measuring learning to learn will be ready, let's say, by December. So that might be one option for a meeting, a scientific workshop. It may be somewhere else, not only in Finland. It could be in some of these meetings which might take place in Europe. There is a European educational conference every year. Also England organizes and things, so that will be of interest, because we have also experimental design there to check whether because we are using computers, so we can give adaptive testing and we can inform children that the item was correct or not correct. So we have models where we promise to give the outcomes and we give, and then we can after each item give information correct or not. And the hypothesis is that we get more more the kind of more social situation of the testing changes toward more interest to individual persons because they get results instantly, not after 2 years.
I have a colleague who's, I think, doing some similar work.
Yes, so we have.
Yeah, yeah.
And this computer-based assessment allows us to do things which have never been possible in a large-scale study.
That could be indeed a subject for the workshop, the assessment of new skills.
And still, we have fully adaptive system for selection for the vocational education in Finland. Government ordered it and we made it. It has been now in use for those who are either not having good school marks or are without school marks. So we produce parallel information for the selection procedure.
Thanks. Frankly speaking, I wanted to ask our colleagues from China and Korea to enter the discussion about possible, if you like, if you have any suggestions on possible topics for the workshop or research. One of us yesterday mentioned that the key question, absolutely key question, is the linkages between discipline and key competences. And in fact, only in Korean case we've heard very clear attempt to connect it. So if you do workshop in Korea, what would be the topic? What do you think?
Well, actually, frankly speaking, this is the time for in Korea time it's almost midnight, so I'm just a little bit out of mind. So as you
a little tired.
Yeah. So as you suggested, So as you suggested, as a researcher of subject matter education, I'm quite interested in how the key competency can be translated into the subject matter curriculum. So that would be one question. And the other thing is the Isaac told us you are interested in the extracurriculum activities, but I would like to I would like to revise your term. In Korea, CES, creativity, experience, activity, I don't think it's extracurricular activity.
Yeah.
It's extra subject or cross subject activity, something like that. So maybe I think that could be one possibility. Does it really make sense to improve the key competency or the key things what you want to teach a student? So yeah, that could be one thing.
Yeah, in fact, what I've learned for sure that this expression extracurriculum activity is wrong as soon as we try to assess its results. Yeah, it's not extracurriculum. It's unusual. It's not, as you said, it's out of subject part of the curriculum.
Or cross or
cross. Yeah, but it's very interesting. And for our Chinese colleagues, what do you think? If you need more time to think, just it's okay.
Actually, we have no much time to think about another topic. But you other topic.
I think this lady said that assessment and evaluation is very important. I don't know whether we should add this. Okay. into the counter case.
Yeah, we agreed that we will talk about assessment, but
Number 10.
no, we agreed to include it in. Okay, Maria will send it. We agreed to include it in both number 1 and number 2. Yeah.
Well, so in terms of the 21st century competencies, that's in number 4, right? How is it assessed?
Yeah, how it's assessed.
Right, and then the other ones are more contextual information about
the assessment system.
what is the assessment system in your system? Yeah.
I did just have a question about technology, because I know it will come up a bit in the country case, but I'm thinking about, Julia, your presentation. There's a lot of emphasis on technology in Julia's presentation at the front end, and I know we'll mention it in the country case, but I just wondered, was there anything kind of pressing or of interest?
I can tell you, yes, for me, well, first of all, digital skills, as a separate track is interesting. And the second one is we are thinking about, and we are, looking at how to build a technological platform that allows personalized learning and, as an integrator, for building the new system. Because we know that in the States, one of the most progressive networks of schools, for example, funded by Zuckerberg Foundation, like Summit Schools, they have really invested a lot into the technology, and it is mind-blowing, and the results they get and the skills that, that they are able to train in addition to the subject curriculum, it's extraordinary.
And it makes me think of the sort of notion of technology as, in a way, neither necessary nor sufficient in a certain sense. I mean, because there's the example we have of our colleagues who put lots of technology into their classrooms in Saudi Arabia,
which can be
and there was nothing,
yes.
because it didn't have the pedagogical kind of whole.
So there is an integrative technology that affects, like builds an ecosystem for the school, and there is approach to just supplying technology, so it's there, but nobody is using it,
and it's not integrated with the
and it's not
learning in any way, right? Yeah.
Okay. From Korea, I would welcome in your country report or otherwise the explanations for this examination-free period, because it's a surprising thing.
I think we heard it. Parents is what I heard, right? Parents were lobbying for that.
No. It's a kind of, at first it was started as a policy, because in Korea every parent, they just complained about the school system and the school education, and someone raised those kind of ideas, and it was maybe 4 years ago, and some school, several schools tried to do those kind of system, and the bureaus in Ministry of Education, they found it was successful. So they put those ideas to the new government, and they drive those kind of things, and then it come into the curriculum.
But now you already described a case of a small reform. Something is done, results are coming, parents or other persons observe the parents, outcomes, then political push is appeared, and politicians change. I mean, an excellent case of a downward movement coming through. That's very rare, and of course, it's a fight. It's a fight of autonomous person against your full examination system.
And also we have opposite position of parents who have opposite position, because their position is at the end of the middle school, the student finally have to face the summative assessment. So they say what's the meaning of just 1 or 2 semester of exam-free semester? So that is the opposite position. So, you know, if one thing happened, there are many...
But that happens with most of the reforms. There are unexpected results.
I feel that, yes, please.
I'm not sure we should describe the whole country's perspective about the curriculum reform, because there is so much paradox, because the different stakeholders have different perspectives, and I'm not sure what is the best practice or popular practice. If you win, I fail. If I win, you fail.
No, I can give you an example. One of your colleagues. Yeah. I can give you an example. One of your colleagues won wrong one. The director of Center for Financing, Research and Education.
Financial?
Yeah, Professor Wrong one. One wrong.
Professor what?
Wrong. Her name is Wrong. She's from your school of education. She's the director.
One wrong.
One wrong.
I know. What?
Yeah. She organized a consortium of IT companies to promote collaborative learning in schools in Beijing.
Yeah.
I guess it's an interesting example of interesting practice. We agreed not to call it best practice, but successful or interesting practice. And it worked very well. So students started to work in teams, etc., because she tried to assess the possibilities of technology. So I guess that, when we meet, I hope, in Helsinki, we'll see some examples and we'll discuss them and we'll see could they go as good practices. Maybe not best practices, but good practices or successful practices.
No good practice. But I'm not sure what is the typical failure or typical failure or
No,
major failure.
what didn't work. I would say if something didn't work, you tried and it didn't work. That's if the country tried something.
In fact, we have discussed with so many headmasters in so many different provincial schools. Yes. Yeah. So we're taking out. We have no any common sense, common perspective, opinion about this best or failure.
You can write that. You can write that. That's there is no definitely good or bad practices. That's
no practices.
In Russia, I can tell you that
we can afford the different levels, different upper class and middle class and lower class school student school.
Yeah, I guess it's
and the different
it's an interesting story.
Areas.
Yeah, what you're saying, it's an interesting story. That indeed in such diverse countries like China, the practices could be completely different. In fact, for Russia, it's also the case.
They have totally different.
I agree. We have huge differences, much greater differences than Canada or Poland or Finland. Yeah.
We can see that from
and that's, by the way, that creates a very specific challenge for our countries.
And that's the word that we used. It was challenge. So in fact, that could be a challenge if you chose to, if that was something that was relevant to your case, right?
Well, Lynn was talking about it at lunch, that it's fine to talk about digital literacy in Beijing or Shanghai,
right?
But in the west of the country, it is irrelevant. it is actually not possible, and it is not a priority, so that they have a very diverse education system that then responds to different problems in different places. I think if there is a way of saying some of that along the way, I think that's very helpful, actually.
And I think that fits with the idea, my sense was, that we had arrived at with what might be an example of a challenge, right? So that would fit right into that question.
Perhaps we might judge something as good or challenging in terms of its efficiency to help develop our competencies and literacies. It works or not.
From my mind, China and other big countries have been always, among other things, of interest in an issue called scaling up. It's relatively easy. In Finland we have 5 million population. It's less than most of your cities. But how to scale up anything? You might invent a nice method of teaching primary arithmetics. I know that you have good. We have been comparing your results in early math in Beijing. But if you, here is the invention which you have made in your university or academy. How do you scale it up? Have you good examples of evidence that something which has been found useful, good evidence, can show how you scale it up to the west part of China, 3,000 kilometers away from Beijing, or how much it is? That would be, you are the biggest country in the world in population. Maybe India is that, but anyway. So you have just experiences which no other country can have. And like William Blake used to say, the devil is in the details. So to get to know anything goes through.
We just, what's good about meetings of scholars, they can, in each cycle of the discussion, that they can invent new question for the next time. So I guess we just, let's finish by that's very important observation that we have, among our cases, we have two very diverse countries, but we also have countries like England with high inequality, and that creates a specific challenge that could be reflected in our work. Saying that, I'm very happy that we are exactly on schedule, and everyone is still here. So we can proceed to the first floor and we can have drinks. I understand that everyone is exhausted. And I know that some of you will tomorrow late evening, so you will have chance to enjoy the city. And Vitaly and my other colleagues, as I understand, are ready to help. Am I right? Yeah. So we can go downstairs and.
May I thank you and also Julia. Her experience shows that money can create things. If you have and you can use it wisely, you get results.
If you use them wisely, money doesn't create anything.
Brains.
People create something.
You wanted to do something and you get it. That's not bad. Good use of private money.
Private money.
This would not have happened without you. So sorry.
Да, давай.
Так, сейчас вот у меня остались вопросы, потому что это то, что не вошло. Зафиксируйте, ладно, чтобы мы это обсудили.